He Sanlang was able to pull Chu Lian's hand away from her eyes by exerting a little force with his slender fingers. He propped himself up with one hand on the dressing table, then used his other hand to capture her two slender wrists. He rained kisses on her tender earlobes and neck before continuing downwards. Chu Lian was held completely under his control. She didn't even have the leeway to struggle. All she could do was retort with her mouth, "He Changdi, stop it. I want to take a bath." "Oh, there's no hurry. It'll help you recover your memory first." Chu Lian was furious. How is this supposed to help recover my memory? Her nagging little mouth was soon attacked. He Sanlang lifted Chu Lian's delicate figure onto the dressing table. It took Chu Lian a few moments before she could even react. He leaned against her as his large hand wandered all over her body on a dangerous path. Chu Lian's entire body felt limp and weak. He bent down beside her ear and asked, "Do you remember now?" Chu Lian seriously wanted to cry. At this point, she didn't dare to say that she didn't remember. She looked towards He Changdi with pleading eyes and nodded pitifully. He Changdi saw that the little woman in his arms had finally admitted defeat, so he immediately started the battle to satisfy Chu Lian. Chu Lian didn't think that he would really go for it, even after she surrendered. She seriously wanted to die right now. She resisted the urge to moan and firmly bit onto her red lips. She glared at him with watery eyes and complained with a shaky voice, "I've already admitted my fault." He Changdi lowered his head and dropped kisses down her beautiful collarbone with his thin lips. His voice was hoarse yet restrained as he said, "Since you made a mistake, you should be punished. You." He Sanlang had already attacked her delicate lips before Chu Lian even got the chance to finish speaking. As a result, the young couple didn't get to the bathroom until an hour later. This also meant that the tub of hot water prepared in the study had become completely unnecessary. He Changdi carried the worn-out Chu Lian directly to their bedroom, then straight into the bathroom inside it. Chu Lian leaned against He Sanlang's sturdy chest, sulking with a pout. He Changdi didn't mind at all. In fact, he felt refreshed. Since he was fully content, there was nothing wrong with yielding to his wife now. With one hand wrapped around Chu Lian's slender waist, his other resting on the edge of the bathtub, He Changdi closed his eyes and laid back to relax. Chu Lian sulked by herself for a while, but she felt that it was pointless when He Changdi didn't even react to her pouting. She turned around slightly and used her index finger to jab at He Changdi's muscular chest. "He Changdi, I've already fulfilled your request. We don't owe each other anything now." He Changdi opened his deep eyes and narrowed them dangerously. He looked at his wife who was lying within his embrace, her face flushed from the hot steam, and said, "What do you mean by that?" Chu Lian gave him a glare. If she wasn't being held within He Changdi's embrace right now, she would have definitely placed her hands on her waist in an imposing manner. "I've already fulfilled the promise I made with you. You can't use that matter to threaten me again." He Changdi glanced at her and smirked. "Who said that was my request? I've already told you earlier. That was a punishment." He Sanlang, don't push your luck. He had done it twice just now. Even if the first time was considered a punishment, then the second time should have been enough to fulfill her promise. How could he be so shameless? Chu Lian's chest was heaving due to anger. He Changdi's gaze narrowed at the sight of her moving chest, which was partially covered by the flower petals within the tub. In the end, the pitiful honored Lady Genie didn't get to sleep until late at night in order to fulfill her promise. Chapter 626, Spring Hunt 2. The next day, Chu Lian was naturally unable to get up at her usual time. However, He Changdi got up early to attend morning court. The crown prince had been grounded. The emperor had even sent officials from the Supreme Court to investigate the incident regarding the fake phoenix. During morning court, He Changdi was simply standing amongst all the officials, but he had a strange feeling that there was a sharp gaze looking down on him from time to time. Only the Chengping Emperor would possess such an oppressive gaze. Although the Chengping Emperor had a good impression of He Changdi, he usually didn't pay all that much attention to him. A sense of caution immediately emerged within He Sanlang's heart. The emperor unexpectedly ordered He Changdi to stay after the court was adjourned. When He Sanlang came out of Qingjing Hall, he was holding an official document within his hand. It was an official document that he and his father, Count Jingon, had presented to the emperor to request permission to leave House Jingon and establish his own noble estate. According to the usual procedures, if things went smoothly, then it would have taken at least half a month to obtain the approval. However, all the procedures had somehow been completed within a few days. Moreover, the Chengping emperor had personally handed the official document to him. It inevitably caused He Changdi to think deeper into this situation. Furthermore, the emperor had even rewarded him with a plot of land within the capital to use as the Anyuan estate. Real estate was very expensive within the capital. Even for noble families who had lived in the capital for several generations, it would be difficult for them to purchase properties here. Originally, He Changdi and Chu Lian had already decided on the estate that they were going to move into. Although it wasn't considered a luxurious manor, the estate had 4 courtyards, which was enough for the young couple to live in. If they chose an estate that was too big, then it would feel rather empty. He Changdi took a look at the property that the emperor had bestowed upon them. It was a 5-courtyard estate that was located in a good area of the capital. The mansion had originally been the residence of a prince during the era of the first emperor. Later on, the mansion had become vacant after that prince had left for his own assigned lands out of the capital. Following the changing of generations, the prince had eventually passed away. However, the estate had remained vacant ever since. Many high-ranking officials and noblemen had had their eyes set on this estate for a long time, but the Chengping emperor owned the property. Thus, no one had dared to take the initiative to obtain that mansion. However, it had so easily fallen into He Changdi's hands now. Even He Changdi was perplexed. He Changdi immediately reported this matter to Chu Lian when he returned to the estate. Chu Lian also thought that there was something weird about it. Although they didn't understand why the emperor was suddenly being so considerate to He Changdi, they had obtained a good residence for themselves. It was a holiday the next day, so He Sanlang and Chu Lian headed over to Kangping Lane to take a look at the estate. Since the emperor had personally approved the official documents and specially gifted them with a new estate, Chu Lian and He Changdi completed their move out of the Jingon estate a month later. Matriarch He found out only on the day they were moving. She almost fainted after finding out. Mu Xiang, who was standing behind Matriarch He, was also in disbelief that He Changdi was really moving out. In the past, she had been able to get a clear understanding of the situation within Songtao Court since she worked close by as the matriarch's handmaid. Now that He Changdi and Chu Lian were moving out of the estate, she wouldn't even have the chance to get close to He Changdi anymore. Mu Xiang was completely stunned. Senior Servant Lu noticed her soulless expression, which made Senior Servant Lu even more cautious of her. Within the entire Jingon estate, only Matriarch He and Mu Xiang were against He Changdi moving out. Countess Jingon had more of He Changdi's interests at heart. If He Changdi hadn't been bestowed the title of Marquis, then he should have continued living in the Jingon estate. However, her son had become a Marquis now. Even if they were able to live together, the position of Count Jingon would be passed down to Dalong in the future, and her youngest son would still have to move out later. Dalong would definitely get married again by then. It would be troublesome if there was an uneven distribution between the two branches. Moreover, the capable young couple of the third branch had the ability to survive on their own. It would also be more comfortable for them. Count and Countess Jingon had also noticed that the matriarch was dissatisfied with Chu Lian. The matriarch had reflected on her behavior after Chu Lian had honestly reprimanded her at Qingxi Hall back then, but there was still a gap between the two. Once enmity sprung up between two people, it would be difficult to clear up misunderstandings and revert back to their previous relationship. Chu Lian was also Marchioness on Yuan, so she would definitely have to take up the mantle of lady in charge of her own household in the future. It was better to let the young couple gain some experience outside while they were still young. If they made any mistakes at this point, Countess Jingon still had the ability to help them out right now. Count Jingon had the same opinion as his wife. However, his perspective was not only limited to He Changdi. Once He Changjue finally settled down, he would also allow his second son to move out with his wife. Chapter 627, Spring Hunt 3. Chu Lian and He Changdi's new residence, the newly named Anyuan estate, was close to Prince Wei's estate. It was only about 15 minutes via horse carriage. For walking, It would also take about 15 minutes when taking a shortcut. Thus, Royal Princess Duanjia was excited about Chu Lian's move, and even Prince and Princess Wei were very happy about this. On the second day, after Chu Lian moved into her new residence, she sent out invitations to her close friends to invite them for a housewarming. Invitations were sent out to Princess Wei, Royal Princess Duanjia, Lady Yang, Old Duchess Zheng, House Ying's Madame Rong, and more. The lively celebration lasted for most of the day. At this time, Manager Qin returned from the northern border with his men. The shopfront on Zhuke Avenue that He Changdi had given her was in the middle of renovations. It was expected to be ready for business in about half a month. At the end of April, the emperor suddenly announced his plans for a spring hunt at the outskirts of the city. The palace worked swiftly. The list of attendees for the spring hunt was confirmed in just 3 days. That evening, He Changdi left work earlier and returned home to tell Chu Lian about the spring hunt. The Anyuan estate was located close to Prince Wei's estate, so Chu Lian didn't really need He Changdi to inform her about the spring hunt. She had already heard the news from Princess Wei. Chu Lian knew how to ride a horse, but she didn't know anything about hunting, let alone archery. It would be considered pretty good if her arrow could even land on the target. However, during dinner, He Changdi told her that her name was on the list of attendees for the spring hunt. Chu Lian set down her chopsticks and exclaimed in shock. She curiously asked, weren't the officials prohibited from bringing their wives and daughters to the spring hunt in past years? There was nothing she could do there even she went. Was she simply going for a sightseeing trip while the others went hunting? When she thought of that scenario, Chu Lian was speechless to the point that she wanted to roll her eyes. Although He Changdi also felt it was strange, the invitees for the spring hunt had already been confirmed. Thus, it wouldn't be appropriate for him to reject the offer in front of the emperor by himself. He Changdi picked up some blanched lettuce and placed it into her bowl. For some reason, Chu Lian really liked to eat vegetarian dishes recently. On the contrary, she didn't really want to eat meat dishes because the greasy taste made her feel sick. She watched as He Sanlang picked up the vibrant green lettuce for her, and then obediently ate it. He Changdi continued speaking in his pleasant voice. This time, all ranked noble ladies of the imperial family are on the list. The emperor bestowed the title of Honored Lady Genie upon you, so it's not that surprising for your name to be on the list. Chu Lian nodded. After much deliberation, that seemed to be the only reasonable explanation. This seemed to be the case when she looked at the list. Royal Princess Duanjia, Feudal Princess Anmin, and Imperial Princess Liao were all on the list of attendees for the spring hunt this time. While they were eating, Chu Lian suddenly thought of a matter. Why isn't there any news regarding my fifth sister's wedding? He Changdi didn't expect her to mention that matter out of the blue. When the couple had talked about this before, He Changdi had even mentioned that Xiao Bojian and Miss Su were engaged. It was originally a matter that was already decided on. However, there seemed to be some unexpected changes in the situation because there hadn't been any news regarding their wedding up until now. He Sanlang shook his head. They'll send someone to look into it later. Chu Lian could only drop the topic for now. She was growing even more cautious of Xiao Bojian inside. She had the feeling that it had been too peaceful recently. It felt as if Xiao Bojian was holding back a big move. As time went by, Chu Lian was becoming more and more unsettled. On the second day of May, the Chengping Emperor set off for the spring hunt with his entourage of officials in tow. All the attendees had to gather at the plaza in front of the palace's main entrance to greet the emperor. After that, they would set off together. Separate carriages had been arranged to transport the supplies that each household brought along. The carriages would follow behind the procession and arrive 2 to 4 hours later. The spring hunt was to last for 3 days and 2 nights. On the way back, they were even going to take a detour to a temporary imperial residence for a short stay. There was a hot spring in the imperial residence, so everyone who was attending this year's spring hunt would get a chance to experience the imperial family's hot spring. The Chengping Emperor was to stay overnight at the imperial residence with everyone and then return to the palace on the next day. Thus, the entire trip was planned to last for 4 to 5 days. Chu Lian and He Changdi woke up early this morning. Since they were going to participate in the spring hunt, Princess Wei had specially ordered several sets of riding attire for Royal Princess Duanjia and Chu Lian. Chu Lian and Royal Princess Duanjia had 3 sets of clothing respectively. Chu Lian had already tried them on when they were sent to the Anyuan estate. The first set was red and silver, the second one was light yellow, and the last set was cherry blossom colored. Although Chu Lian didn't have a tall stature, she had good proportions and a nice figure. The red riding attire that she was wearing today was even more figure-hugging than her usual attire. Her hairstyle was changed to a more simplified style for convenience, as she would be riding a horse. She didn't wear any hairpins, but a thin silver-chained ruby headdress hung in front of her forehead. There were 2 small hair ornaments with pink pearl inlays on both sides of her hair bun. Chu Lian didn't wear earrings, so 2 small ear piercings can be seen on her fair earlobes. Wenqing and Wanlan were worried that third young madam would be cold. Although it was already May, they found a brocade cloak of the same color for her to wear. On her feet, she wore a pair of exquisite deerskin boots. The simple and practical female riding attire complemented her figure well. Chu Lian appeared more refreshing and gallant today, especially when she looked up with an unrestrained smile on her small face. She was like a radiant sunflower that people were reluctant to look away from. He Sanlang was unexpectedly dazzled by his own wife. Chapter 628 Spring Hunt 4 The tall He Changdi was also wearing a set of riding attire today. A long bow and a quiver of arrows hung on the back of his horse, leaping clouds. He was standing beside his horse in his black riding attire, which was embroidered with complex patterns. His entire body emitted a chilly and sharp aura, as if he was a handsome god of war about to step onto the battlefield. He Sanlang rarely dressed up like this on normal occasions. Since he worked in the Ministry of War now, he usually wore court outfits. While in the estate, he would often wear a casual robe with a cloak. Even when he was practicing martial arts, he would just wear a simple practice outfit. Thus, even Chu Lian had rarely seen him wear such formal attire. He Changdi was truly worthy of the nickname, He Sanlang the Fair. When he dressed up like this, he would definitely charm numerous hearts by just casually walking around Juke Avenue. Chu Lian walked up to He Changdi's side. She couldn't resist looking him over a couple more times before slightly pouting. If I knew you were going to look this good in riding attire, I wouldn't have let you change. He Sanlang had never cared about his appearance, so he didn't understand the meaning behind Chu Lian's remark. He just responded with a curious hum. Chu Lian gave him a glare, then announced in a domineering manner, "They'll let it go this time. But I'm the only one allowed to see you wearing these kinds of outfits in the future." He Changdi immediately understood her meaning. The icy expression on his handsome face seemed to melt instantly. He reached out to caress Chu Lian's hair. He bent down slightly and spoke at a volume that only Chu Lian could hear. "All right, I'll only wear it for you to see. I'll go change into another outfit. There's still enough time." After he finished speaking, he straightened his back, seemingly really intending to return to their room to change. Chu Lian hastily grabbed onto his sleeve and said speechlessly, "I can't believe you're actually going back to change. You're not allowed to go. Everyone is going to be dressed in riding outfits later. If you don't wear this, then the others will start gossiping." A corner of He Changdi's mouth lifted irresistibly. He reached out his hand to stroke the buttons on the front of Chu Lian's riding attire. Then he moved closer to her like earlier. "I share the same thoughts." Chu Lian gaped a little in shock. He Sanlang was already helping Chu Lian up onto his horse, leaping clouds. After Chu Lian sat down, He Changdi immediately followed up by mounting his horse. Chu Lian could feel He Changdi's sturdy chest behind her. She clasped the reins in a daze, turned around with a stiff face, and asked awkwardly, "You were riding on the same horse? This doesn't seem appropriate." They were going to be in front of a big crowd. Although they were a married couple, it didn't seem proper for them to be blatantly riding together in such close proximity out on the public streets. Wouldn't they be drawing enmity by flaunting their relationship like this? He Changdi sent a signal with his eyes to the servants behind them. After that, he reached around Chu Lian to grab the reins. Leaping Clouds promptly broke out into a trot after he shook the reins. Chu Lian was surprised by the sudden movement and quickly grabbed onto his arm to balance herself. A moment later, Chu Lian heard He Changdi speaking beside her ear. "With your level of horsemanship, are you trying to make us late?" It would take 30 minutes to travel to the palace from the Anyuan estate. If Chu Lian really rode the horse by herself, It would probably take her at least 45 minutes to arrive. While Chu Lian did know how to ride a horse, her skills were only average. There were many people on the streets of the capital, so something could easily go wrong if one didn't have enough control over their mount. Chu Lian didn't have any choice. She could only silently accept He Changde's decision. She puffed up her cheeks. Since we're already running late, why did you want to go back to change your clothes earlier? He Changde chuckled. He gave out a command with his voice. At his signal, leaping clouds broke out into a gallop. Chu Lian was unprepared, so she jerked backwards and bumped against He Changde's chest. I said that because I can make leaping clouds run even faster. Chu Lian was frightened. Leaping clouds had probably been locked up for too long. Now that he was finally free, he was sprinting all out. In the end, Chu Lian was only able to somewhat steady herself after He Changde held onto her waist with his free arm. Chu Lian was shocked by the speed of leaping clouds, so she wasn't in the mood to debate with He Changde about the previous topic of whether he should change his clothing. Since they were riding on He Changde's horse, they arrived at the plaza in less than 30 minutes. There were already many people waiting when Chu Lian and He Changde arrived. All of them were accompanied by a servant holding a horse beside them. He Changde and Chu Lian were the only ones to arrive together like this. When leaping clouds came to a stop and stomped his hooves, everyone's attention fell upon Chu Lian and He Changde. There were various expressions in their eyes. Most of the men had envious gazes. Marquis Yuan really knew how to have fun. He was still being all lovey-dovey with his wife while on the way to the spring hunt. Why hadn't they thought of doing the same? What a shame. Most of the women felt jealous. They turned furious glares at their own inconsiderate husbands. The reproach and resentment within their gazes was intense. Look at how Marquis Yuan pampers his wife, then take a look at yourself. There were a few fiery gazes among the crowd which were hard to ignore. Xiao Bojian was standing at the edges of the crowd. He watched as He Changde and Chu Lian arrived together, riding closely on the same horse. After that, he saw He Changde helping Chu Lian off the horse in a half-embrace. He clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles had already turned white. The other resentful gaze belonged to Imperial Princess Liao. She was the Emperor's daughter, so she was naturally qualified to participate in the spring hunt this time. She had already turned 11 after the new year. Ever since she had gotten into a conflict with Chu Lian and gotten grounded by the Emperor, she seemed to have lost favor with her father. The Emperor stopped pampering her like before, and had instead ordered Imperial concubine Wei to discipline her strictly. Chapter 629. Stinky Tofu 1. Although Chu Lian felt her cheeks burning, she simply disregarded the fiery looks of envy and jealousy shot her way. For this year's spring hunt, all the military officials residing in the capital, regardless of rank, were in attendance. Included amongst these were Sima Hui, Captain Guo, Zhang Mai, Xiao Hongyu, and the rest. He Changde took Chu Lian out with him to greet their old comrades from the Northern Border Army. Xiao Hongyu was a troublemaking little fellow, so he had already skipped over to welcome Chu Lian before they had even reached the group. "Good afternoon, sister-in-law." Chu Lian smiled at him in reply. Sima Hui also walked over to meet them at this time. Sima Hui was dressed in a white riding outfit today. She had a tall figure and a handsome flair to her looks, unlike most of the ladies in the capital, so she looked very eye-catching. Sima Hui nodded courteously to He Changde. When her eyes fell upon Chu Lian, they lit up. "Lianer, this riding outfit suits you very well," Sima Hui praised generously. Chu Lian's silver and red riding outfit was indeed very complimentary to her looks. The sleeves of the top were decorated with many butterfly bows, giving her a mischievous yet cute appearance. Chu Lian smiled until her eyes turned into crescents. She bobbed in front of Sima Hui. "Thank you for your compliment, Sister Hui." Sima Hui bent her head down and whispered into Chu Lian's ear, "Let's go together later." Of course, Chu Lian wasn't going to reject her offer. She had spent quite some time with Sima Hui in the north. They were close friends by now. Before Chu Lian could reply, she was pulled back one step by He Changde. He Sanlang stared at Sima Hui with a frostier expression than usual. "No, Lianer is going to be by my side." Sima Hui looked up at He Changde and a smile sprang to her lips. "Marquis Yuan, you'll have to accompany His Majesty later." He Chang's expression grew even more thunderous at her words. She was right. As the administrator of the Department of Appointments, as well as the newly titled Marquis on Yuan, he would definitely have to spend most of his time by the Emperor's side during the spring hunt. He didn't have the time to take care of Chu Lian in the meanwhile. Chu Lian tugged at He Chang's sleeve with a smile. Relax. Nothing will happen to me if I'm with Sister Hui. The crease between He Chang's brows could kill a fly by now. He sucked in a breath and held it. When he looked at his wife's sparkly eyes, he couldn't speak his true thoughts, that he was worried precisely because it was Sima Hui with her. In the end, he had no choice but to leave Chu Lian in Sima Hui's care. Since the Emperor had arrived, he had to lead his men to welcome His Majesty. Not too far away was the living area marked out for the princes and princesses. The Crown Prince was standing to the left of Prince Jean, while the 15-year-old sixth prince was to his right. The 11-year-old Imperial Princess Liao stood right behind the azure-eyed prince. Behind Princess Liao was feudal Princess Anmin. Right now, Imperial Princess Liao was expressing her contempt. A poor, honored lady and a tomboy who can't find someone to marry her. As they say, birds of a feather flock together. Cousin Anmin, we'll have to show them what we can do later on. Feudal Princess Amin's reply was so light that Prince Jean couldn't even hear what she said. He turned his head, catching sight of Sima Hui's tall figure from the corner of his eyes. His gaze rested there for a moment before he shifted it away. When the Qingping Emperor arrived, dressed in a dark navy riding habit, everyone respectfully bowed or bobbed in welcome. Due to their status, Chu Lian and Sima Hui were positioned on the outer rings of the entourage. The Emperor was surrounded by so many of his courtiers and nobles that Chu Lian could only see the top of his head from where she was standing. While the two of them had been lowering their waists and their bobs, Sima Hui had spoken in a strange tone. Lianer, why does it feel like His Majesty is looking our way? Chu Lian didn't believe her and rolled her eyes in amusement. There are so many people around. Why would His Majesty look at us? However, I wasn't expecting to be invited this time. I'm not really related to the imperial family after all, and my title is the lowest-ranked honored lady. Chu Lian's words made Sima Hui frown. Lianer, make sure you don't leave my side later. This was indeed a little out of the ordinary. She didn't have any knowledge of the future events from now on. It would be best to be careful in everything she did. Once the officials from the Ministry of Rites finished the opening ceremony for the spring hunt, the Emperor led all the members participating in the hunt-off in a grand procession. Chu Lian and Sima Hui were riding near the middle of the large group, together with many other noble ladies. Although Royal Princess Duanjia wanted to ride with the two of them, she had no choice but to ride up front with Princess Wei, Imperial Princess Liao, and the rest of the imperial family members due to her special identity. At the back of the group were the carriages holding their luggage and servants. The imperial hunting grounds were located at the outskirts of the capital, so it wasn't too far away. They would likely reach before 2 p.m. He Changdi, Xiao Bojian, Zheng, and various princes, nobles, and the young sons of nobles were all following by the emperor's side. Their proximity to the emperor was normally arranged by seniority and rank, but for some reason, the emperor had specially picked He Changdi to be by his side today. Since the emperor had named him personally, He Sanling had no choice but to accept. Chapter 630. Stinky Tofu 2. He Changdi didn't dare to tarry in front of the emperor. After his experience in his past life, He Sanling understood how the emperor was as a ruler. He was clear with his rewards and punishments and ruled over the country with a fair hand. He could be deemed a wise ruler. He had a secret spy corps under his control which would seek out underground information for him and listen to his orders alone. The identities of the emperor's spies were a mystery, and any information about the corps was hidden deeply. Even the crown prince had no clue about what the secret spy corps did. Sometimes, He Changdi suspected that the emperor knew about almost every secret in his lands, but he simply kept quiet about his knowledge. His knowledge might pertain to the major politics going on in the background with his courtiers, or be as minor as the battles between legitimate and illegitimate children in the rear courts of his nobles' estates. Thus, it was best to speak truthfully with as many details as possible in front of the emperor. If one tried to boast or exaggerate, they would likely die in mysterious ways one day. He Changdi picked out some incidents to speak of from his experience in the north. They were all little stories which didn't focus on any person in particular. He couldn't tell what the emperor was thinking from his expression. The emperor suddenly tugged on the reins of his mount. He held his soft riding whip aloft and set it down against the flank of his horse, which immediately responded by breaking into an all-out gallop. The guards and courtiers surrounding the emperor immediately urged their own steeds to follow. For some reason, the emperor seemed to be in the mood for a fast ride. His horse sped on faster and faster, until only his guards and the few courtiers with better horsemanship like He Changdi could keep up. The party had dwindled down to only 10 in number. He Lin reminded the emperor with worry, "Your Majesty, perhaps it would be better to wait here for now. The princes and princesses have yet to catch up. There were only 10 people here with the emperor right now. If any assassins were lying in wait, they likely wouldn't be able to escape with their lives intact." The Chengping emperor's gaze was wandering over their surroundings, with no indication that he had heard He Lin's words. He finally pulled at the reins and slowed his horse down. The emperor cast a sideways glance at He Changdi, who had maintained the same distance from him all this time, with a new glint of satisfaction in his eye. The ones remaining here were all the emperor's trusted subordinates and guards. He wouldn't have to worry about anything he said now spreading elsewhere. As if realizing the emperor's intentions, a chill sprang up in He Changdi's heart. Even after living an entire lifetime before, he couldn't help but be nervous at this time. The emperor had urged his steed into a gallop on purpose earlier. He had likely been counting on He Changdi being able to keep up, and had been intending to lure He Changdi into this situation. He Sanlang held on to his reins with one hand, his eyes cast downwards and his mind on full alert. Suddenly, the emperor spoke. "When did you get married?" The strange question made He Changdi freeze up for an instant, but he quickly replied, "The end of August last year. We heard the Empress Dowager mention this before, in the sense that your marriage with Genie was personally decreed by her. It was something that your grandmother entered the palace to request." He Changdi's eyes turned dark. Why had the emperor dug up news about his marriage? Yes, this humble official's marriage was indeed arranged for by grandmother and the Empress Dowager. Why a lady from the Chu family then? With your status, you had better choices. While there wasn't any change in the emperor's expression, his tone had become more stern, even carrying a trace of unhappiness. Although He Changdi could sense that the emperor was hiding his anger, he didn't understand the source of it. He couldn't say any falsehoods at this point either. He could only speak the truth. "Your Majesty must have heard about our He family's problems. We have too few family members." Grandmother pleaded for a Chu family bride for this humble official after hearing of their reputation. Their fertility? He Changdi remained silent in agreement. The emperor harumphed. That one sound was enough to make everyone present break out into cold sweat and wish that they could put some distance between them. Accompanying the emperor was like playing with a tiger, as the saying went. The emperor's mood had suddenly changed for the worse after a few questions about Marquis Inyuan's family. They all had confused expressions. No one could understand why the emperor was suddenly so unhappy. Amongst all the emperor's followers, it was He Lin whose expression ranked as the weirdest. He Lin was the only person other than the emperor who knew the truth. Pity welled within He Lin, and he glanced over at the oblivious Marquis Yuan, lighting a candle in prayer in his heart for the Marquis. He had married a princess, yet he didn't know how to treasure her. He even said it right in front of the emperor that he had only wanted her as a tool for giving birth to the next generation. Only Marquis Yuan had that kind of daring in the entire dynasty. Thumbs up. This He Lin admires you. After a long period of silence, the emperor spoke up once again. Since it was for the sake of carrying on the next generation, why were you dissatisfied with your bride after the wedding? Why didn't you consummate your marriage and leave the estate directly? The emperor's previous questions had only been on the level of gossip, which could be heard from anyone around. However, the emperor had just revealed that he knew about all the details of their lives down to these secret facts. The secret spy corps was indeed a terrifying department. He Changdi was trying his best to hide the utter shock in his mind. The gears in his head turned furiously. However, when faced with such a hot potato of a question, he didn't know how to answer. What exactly was he supposed to say? Was he supposed to tell the Emperor straight out that he had reincarnated into this life again? That he knew exactly what his newlywed wife Chu Lian was like? That she was a wicked woman who had betrayed him? How he hated her to the core, and how he couldn't possibly have consummated their marriage? If he really said the truth, no one would believe him and might even think him mad. Any explanation that touched on the supernatural would give him a straight path to ruin. He Changdi had no intention of speaking the absolute truth. Chapter 631. Stinky Tofu 3. Your Majesty is wise. It was this humble official who didn't see clearly in the past. The expression on the Chengping Emperor's face turned even more sour upon receiving such a vague answer from He Changdi. He cast a cold glance over the young man behind him, obvious disappointment in his gaze. Do you think that genie isn't good enough for you? Alarm spiked in He Changdi. He didn't understand why the emperor would have such thoughts. He Sanling shook his head resolutely and said, "This humble official has never thought so." The emperor didn't continue his line of questioning, but he had already completed his evaluation of He Changdi as a man of ability. From the day of He Changdi and Chu Lian's wedding, to He Changdi's time in the Northern Border Army, to the great victory over the two Huns, the emperor had sent out his spies to dig out all the details of their lives these past few days. There was no way to hide anything from the fearsome spy corps if they were determined to dig out all details. The letters Chu Lian had sent to He Changdi, the hint to join under Captain Gui's banner, the beef jerky and snacks, as well as the grape wine that Chu Lian had passed on to He Changdi via courier, as well as the grape wine being the reason he had caught Great General Qian's eyes. Following that, the spy corps had also reported about how Chu Lian had opened Gillen Restaurant, and how she had found Great Dr. Miao in order to treat Countess Jinggan's illness. In the most critical period, when there was no one available in the Jinggan estate, how Chu Lian had volunteered to go to the northern border herself to help He Changdi find the last important ingredient needed for the medicine, the Snow Mountain Mist Flower, all the way down to the design of the snowboats and their making. Listing down all of the incidents like this, Chu Lian had done many things behind the scenes for He Changdi. She had also somehow saved Royal Princess Duanjia and made friends with Prince Wei's estate. Behind every part of He Changdi's success was Chu Lian's shadow. Perhaps He Changdi had only seen her value after Chu Lian had done so much, and finally acknowledged her position as his legitimate wife and consummated their marriage upon returning to the capital. That was how the emperor thought in his mind. It was also precisely because of all this information that the spy corps discovered the emperor's impression of He Changdi's person was extremely bad. In the emperor's heart, He Changdi wasn't fit to be the husband of his and Yi Sun's precious daughter. The gaze he directed into the distance grew icier. "Did you think up the snowboats by yourself?" He Sanling heard the emperor ask coldly. He frowned and replied without any hesitation, "Replying to your majesty, this humble official did not. It was this humble official's wife who came up with the snowboats' blueprints and the actual snowboats." Great General Qian had credited He Changdi as the creator of the snowboat in order to give him extra merits in his military report. Other than He Changdi, Chu Lian, and a few of her trusted subordinates, no one else knew that the snowboat had any relation to Chu Lian. Later on, Chu Lian had told He Changdi to take the snowboats to the northern border camp. Chu Lian had wanted to keep a low profile, so she herself requested to keep the matter a secret. Thus, when Great General Qian reported the matter, all credit naturally fell onto He Changdi. Chu Lian didn't care much about such minor details, and their relationship had already changed after that, so she didn't mind it at all. Unfortunately, this minor matter was completely different in the eyes of a doting and remorseful father. From the emperor's point of view, he thought that He Changdi had stolen Chu Lian's credit. He had even suspected that He Changdi had earned his title mostly through Chu Lian's own efforts. He had assumed that He Changdi wouldn't admit to the theft, but He Changdi had surprised him by admitting so readily that it had been Chu Lian who had come up with the snowboat. The emperor's feelings were now slightly complicated. He didn't ask He Changdi anything else as they waited for the rest of the hunting party to catch up with them. Other than the sound of their horses' hoofbeats, silence surrounded them, making the atmosphere heavy. He Changdi was starting to realize that the emperor wasn't happy with him because of Chu Lian, but he couldn't guess at what the relation between the two of them was. They had set off so happily in the morning, but now that they were close to the imperial hunting grounds, everyone could sense the emperor's gloomy mood, especially the emperor's attendants and bodyguards. They didn't dare to make a sound, even when they were retrieving items from their saddlebags. They finally arrived at the hunting grounds, where tents had been set up for the hunting party. Since they were to spend the night on the grounds itself, there were already tents erected all over the area. Of course, the emperor's tent was the most eye-catching and luxurious. The prince's tents were placed around the emperor's tent. Only imperial concubine Wei had been invited, out of the entire inner palace, so imperial concubine Wei and the princesses were situated behind the emperor's tent. The next ring of tents belonged to the more influential officials, nobles, and military officials. House Inyuan's tent wasn't too far away from the center, nor too close to the edges. It had a good position somewhere in the middle of the entire party. There was also a natural pool not too far away. The water in the pool was crystal clear and pure. They could drink straight out of the pool. Sima Hu's tent was right next to Chu Lian's, just 20 or so meters away. Since it was already 12 in the afternoon, when the emperor entered the hunting grounds, he headed straight to his tent to rest. The imperial cooks had already prepared a luxurious meal for the emperor. The rest of the hunting party dispersed to their own tents for some rest. The emperor would only bring everyone out to hunt later, closer to evening. There were still 4 hours until that time. Chapter 632. Stinky Tofu 4. Chu Lian had only brought Wenqing and Wanlan this time. They were riding in the carriage with all of their clothes. By the time Chu Lian and He Changdi had arrived at the camp, they had only just arrived mere minutes earlier. One of their stewards steered the carriage and parked it next to their tent. Chu Lian ordered Wenqing and Wanlan about as they unpacked the things they had brought with them. The steward and 2 guards were helping to unload the luggage off the carriage. As they saw what their marchioness had packed, the old steward couldn't help the twitch that developed in the corner of his mouth. Just look at all this. A specially made metal wok, a strange metal rack with unknown purpose, all sorts of ingredients that a hunting ground would lack, seasonings he had never heard of, jerky, fruits, desserts. Of the luggage they had brought in that one carriage, half of it was food. As for the other half, they were all things to cook food. In comparison, look at what the noble madam over there had brought. Clothes, accessories, incense, all sorts of furnishings. The old steward bowed his head in shame, resigned to his fate. He continued helping his noble madam move all sorts of food-related items into the tent. However, the foodies staring at Chu Lian and He Changdi's tent didn't share the same thoughts. Before they had even started preparing the meal, there was already a table full of guests in Chu Lian's tent. Sima Hui and Royal Princess Duanjia were to be expected, since they were both ladies. However, what was with Great General Qian and Old Duke Zheng inviting themselves in? What were these 2 old bear-eyes doing here? Captain Guo, Xiao Hongyu, and Zhang Mai didn't have any space to sit. However, they would rather stand than leave. Royal Princess Duanjia rolled her eyes. Chu Lu, tell your servants to cook a little less, just enough for our table to eat. Ignore those gluttons standing over there. Xiao Hongyu hadn't eaten breakfast in the rush to leave the morning. As a young man, he couldn't bear with the hunger and was starving by now. Royal Princess Duanjia's words only made him feel even more stubborn. Unfortunately, due to the princess status, he couldn't respond to her provocation. Chu Lian didn't know whether to laugh or cry looking at the tent full of guests. For the nobles settling into the hunting grounds, they had brought their servants to cook their meals. The emperor's meals were taken care of by his attendants, but for the 3 soldiers, they had to take care of their own meals. It was only if the emperor specially ordered a feast to be held that they would be able to gather for dinner. Looking at the number of guests, the maidservants they had brought wouldn't be enough. The sight that first greeted He Changdi when he entered their tent was their table full of guests. His expression immediately turned overcast. However, he couldn't say anything with old Duke Zheng and Great General Qian around, since their statuses were greater than his. Chu Lian looked at the ingredients that the steward had brought and wondered what to cook. Luckily, the steward had packed extra food just in case. Otherwise, there might not have been enough to feed this group of gluttons. Since there were so many people present, Chu Lian told Winching to grill some lamb chops and prepare a large pot of sour beef stew. The sour beef stew contained a lot of mushrooms and vegetables. It was very appetizing when paired with white rice. It was the best dish for a large party like this. Since they were in the wilderness, they could prepare simple dishes without being too fussy about the presentation. As Wenqing and Wanlan worked on the lamb chops and sour beef stew, Chu Lian continued looking through the ingredients they had brought. She lifted the cloth covering a small bamboo basket. When she saw what was inside the basket, Chu Lian's eyes lit up. Stinky tofu. This was what she had made a few days ago with the maidservants when she was bored. Since it couldn't be stored for long, the cook managing Songtao Court's kitchen had packed it in when the steward had told her to prepare ingredients for the trip. Chu Lian loved to eat fried stinky tofu the most back in the modern era, especially Changsha's special stinky tofu. The stinky tofu would be perfectly crisp once prepared properly. In order to make it Changsha style, she just had to spread a layer of bright red chili paste on the outside. If you bit into it, it would be crispy and fragrant, with the perfect crunchiness on the outside and soft tofu on the inside. While it still stunk to high heaven, it was addictive once you got past the smell and took the first bite. Stinky tofu was a pretty marvelous food when you thought about it. Chu Lian stared at the pieces of stinky tofu in the little bamboo basket and frowned. If she didn't use them up today, it would likely spoil. Wasting food was criminal. The weather was slowly warming up again. Fresh foods would spoil faster now. Furthermore, she hadn't eaten stinky tofu in a long time, and she had been craving for it for so long. She checked the time and realized that there was still enough time before the spring hunt to cook the stinky tofu. After a slight moment of hesitation, Chu Lian made her decision. She took up the little basket and moved over to the stove where Wenqing and Wanlan were preparing food. Wanlan was in the middle of seasoning the lamb chops. Seeing that her master had come over, Wanlan quickly set down the things in her hands and welcomed her, taking the little basket from her master's delicate hands. She even said, "Third young madam, please rest and leave all the work to us servants." Chu Lian couldn't resist bursting out into laughter. "You and Wanlan won't be able to do this." Wanlan refused to admit defeat. She and her sister had been serving third young madam for so long, and third young madam had never been stingy with sharing her cooking techniques with her handmaids. How hard could making a few dishes for their guests be? Wanlan blinked and looked at the basket that she was now holding. "Third young madam, what's in here?" Chu Lian noticed her curiosity. A mischievous glint passed through her eyes. "If you want to know, why don't you open it up?" Chapter 633. How Stinky. 1. Although the expression in third young madam's eyes was a little strange, Wanlan didn't think too much of it. She paused for an instant before flipping open the cloth covering the basket. The refreshing spring wind blew past, helpfully spreading the sour smell from the contents of the basket. Wanlan immediately pinched her nose with her free hand and held the basket as far away from herself as she could. Aggrieved, her voice came out nasally as she asked Chu Lian, "Third young madam, what's this? Why is it so stinky? Has it gone bad on the way here?" Chu Lian giggled and took the basket from Wenlan's hand. "It's not spoiled. It was like this from the start." Wanlan didn't dare to stop pinching her nose. She stared at Chu Lian with wide, shocked eyes, unable to imagine how something so smelly could be food. "Are you sure this is still edible? It's all black and it smells terrible." The smell alone was enough to drive anyone 1,000 miles away in fear, let alone put it in their mouths. Chu Lian let out a mysterious smile. "Don't judge things by their covers. Once you have a taste of this, you'll be hooked immediately." Although Wanlan didn't reply, still in disdain over the stinky tofu in the basket, the blatant curiosity in her eyes betrayed her. Wanlan watched as third young madam earnestly washed her hands, as if she was really about to cook the stinky tofu. At the sight, Wanlan couldn't help but say, "Third young madam, perhaps you should save this dish for another time? We've already prepared enough food for the meal today." Wouldn't old Duke Zheng faint if they served such a foul-smelling dish to him? Considering that the stinky tofu smell really wasn't for everyone, Chulian thought for a bit before saying, "All right, I'll just cook enough for myself then. Don't serve it to the tint." Winching and Wanlan hurriedly agreed. They had brought a specially made furnace with them. The furnace was fueled by charcoal, and there was a custom-made steel wok on top of it. Chu Lien poured the oil she had prepared into the wok and heated it up. Now it was time to fry the stinky tofu. The stinky tofu had been chopped into blocks around the size of half her palm. She used a pair of chopsticks to place them carefully into the pool of oil. When the black tofu entered the golden oil, bubbles formed around the blocks. Soon, the tofu spread out and expanded. Once the outer layer was fried to a golden crisp, it was time to scoop it out. Since this was purely to satisfy her own cravings, Chu Lien only made a small dish of them, 4 pieces in total. She carefully placed the 4 black and gold pieces of stinky tofu onto a clean, white porcelain dish. Finally, she poured the sweet and spicy chili paste she had prepared earlier over the tofu. Other than being a little stinky, the tofu actually looked rather delicious. The black mixed with red was visually appealing, and there was a certain fried fragrance to it as well. Wanlan stared with her mouth slightly agape at Chu Lian's familiar actions. She had thought that Chu Lian had just been kidding. Who could have expected that third young madam would really use that disgusting stinky tofu as a dish? Somehow, it even looked good after plating. For some reason, the strange smell billowing towards her gave her the urge to have a taste. Chu Lian didn't have any spare time to care about what Wanlan was thinking. She took up a clean pair of chopsticks and hurriedly picked up a piece of tofu. Then, she blew on it to cool it down before placing it into her mouth. The unique fragrance of stinky tofu spread across her taste buds. The moment she bit into it, the combination of the gentle taste of the tofu, the crispy exterior, the saltiness of the seasoning, the oil, as well as the spiciness of the chili paste, brought a whole new kind of experience to her. That kind of taste could make anyone hooked by the first bite and leave them wanting for more. Chu Lien chewed happily with her cheeks slightly puffed like a hamster. The satisfaction of finally tasting her long-awaited craving made her eyes narrow with pleasure. Sometimes, it was clear whether someone enjoyed eating something just from their expressions alone. Chu Lian's expression right now showed exactly how much she was enjoying and savoring her food. Since she was already used to the modern world's standard of food, Chu Lien had always maintained a calm and normal expression while teaching the maidservants how to cook. Although the maidservants always exclaimed that the new dishes that Chu Lien had introduced to them were peerless, Chu Lien had never shown any particular reaction while tasting them. It made them feel as if Chu Lien had grown up eating such exquisite dishes all day. The handmaid serving Chu Lien always had a minor sense of defeat upon seeing their madam's calm. Thus, it was rare for them to see third young madam's expression full of satisfaction and nostalgia while eating. Sometimes, the familiar taste of a certain dish could indeed evoke the joyful memories of the past. Stinky tofu was one such dish for Chu Lien. Once a single piece of stinky tofu had vanished down her gut, Chu Lien let out a small sigh of satisfaction. Wanlan couldn't help gulping down her drool while watching Chu Lien eat. She thought she must have been possessed. She hadn't even liked the smell of that black tofu earlier, so why did she suddenly have the urge to taste it? Third young madam, what does it taste like? Chu Lien gestured towards the stove next to her with a curve of her lips. Want you know if you taste it yourself? TL note, I've never tried stinky tofu before, but it sounds a little intimidating. Chu Lien's version seems to be the black one. So here are some illustrations. Stinky tofu being fried stinky tofu with chili paste. Chapter 634. How Stinky? 2. Wanlan looked at the stinky tofu before glancing back at Chu Lien. Finally, she shut her eyes, took up a pair of chopsticks, and shoved a piece of tofu into her mouth. Once it sat on her tongue, it wasn't as unbearable as she had thought it would be. When she bit into the piece of tofu, the juice inside burst out and mixed with the chili paste to create a pool of deliciousness. It was even slightly sweet. The unique flavor completely rewrote her taste buds. Wanlan had only dared to nibble on it before, but her mouth suddenly started moving faster. Once she finished the first piece, Her chopsticks reached out subconsciously to pick up another. Unfortunately, Chu Lian blocked her attack. There are only 2 pieces left. The rest is mine. Go work on the other dishes. Wanlan looked back longingly at the 2 remaining pieces of stinky tofu. She smiled winningly at Chu Lian and said, "Third young madam, isn't there still a whole basket of this? Why don't you let this servant fry more after we're done cooking for the guests?" That was when Chu Lian knew that her handmaid had completely fallen for the charm of stinky tofu. She didn't stop Wanlan and instructed her, "Finish preparing the meal first. Later on, you're free to do whatever you like with the remaining time." The order made Wanlan cheer up considerably. Old Duke Zheng had been standing at the entrance of the tent, waiting impatiently for quite some time. In his old age, his temper had regressed to become more like a child's. When he saw that Chu Lian had actually started eating, his whiskers bristled and his eyes went wide. He started striding over with a grim expression. Just as Chu Lian was about to put the second piece of stinky tofu in her mouth, she was frightened by a sudden shout from behind. "Genie, what are you secretly eating? Have you made something delicious again? Why aren't you taking it out to pay respects to your seniors?" Old Duke Zheng's wrinkled face was set in an extremely strict expression. Those unfamiliar with him might really have thought that he was angry. If she hadn't had enough experience interacting with this old geezer, Chu Lian might also have thought the same. Since old Duke Zheng had come, there was no helping it. Chu Lian couldn't just enjoy her delicacy alone any longer. She immediately took out a pair of clean chopsticks for the old duke. "You've come just in time, Your Grace. I was about to get Winching to serve you a portion of this. Since you're already here, why don't you have a taste now?" Wanlan watched from the side as old Duke Zheng fearlessly picked up a piece of stinky tofu and stuffed it into his mouth. At first, he chewed slowly, but then his eyes lit up in delight, and immediately thereafter, his chewing speed increased at a frightening rate. Wanlan was dumbstruck by the Duke's reaction. Wouldn't old Duke Zheng have at least questioned the smell? When he finished the piece of tofu, old Duke Zheng quickly asked, "What's this? Although the taste is somewhat weird, it's delicious." "Stinky tofu," Chu Lian replied calmly. Old Duke Zheng's eyes widened in shock. "Stinky tofu? So it's spoiled tofu?" It was Chu Lian's turn to become speechless. "So you could smell it after all?" Old Duke Zheng rolled his eyes. "Of course, my nose is working perfectly well. Then why did you eat it without hesitation when it's so stinky?" Chu Lian needed some time to recover from her surprise. Those who hadn't eaten stinky tofu would normally want to run away when they first encounter the smell. It would be considered pretty good if they weren't scared off, let alone have the courage to take a bite of it. Old Duke Zheng had already taken the last piece and demolished it while they were talking. He chewed noisily, clearly unsatisfied. He cast a glance over at Chu Lian and said, "I've already watched you eat it. You're such a picky eater that you won't eat anything unless it's tasty, and you look like you were enjoying it so much. That's why I didn't hesitate at all." Old Duke Zheng might even be able to take the more special dishes like durian or the fearsome surströmming if he watched Chu Lian eat them, let alone a mild dish like this tofu. Chu Lian was speechless from old Duke Zheng's explanation. She didn't know how to reply to that. What's it called, stinky tofu? Make a few more for me." The old Duke left behind these words before happily leaving the tent. Well, that settled it then. Since the Duke had already personally ordered more of the stinky tofu, Chu Lian taught Wanlan how to cook more of it. When it was time for their midday meal, there were quite a few dishes placed on the wooden table inside the tent. Although they seemed a little more crude than usual, there was more than enough food and the taste went without saying. This was well suited for Captain Guo, Zhang Mai, and Xiao Hongyu, who were used to rougher military fare. Chu Lian, Sima Hui, and Royal Princess Duanjia sat at another table with a screen separating them. There were a few extra portions of stinky tofu, which were very popular with all her guests, to Chu Lian's surprise. No wonder it was one of the most popular street snacks sold everywhere in the modern world. While eating, Captain Guo slapped He Changdi on the shoulder and said, "Zixiang, do you know what your face looks like right now?" He Sanlang cast a cold glare at his boss and harumphed. Before Captain Guo could continue, Xiao Hongyu had already burst out into laughter. He quickly cut in and said, "Huh, I know. Brother He's expression is just as stinky as this tofu. Don't you guys think so too? Ha ha ha. He Changdi. Zhang Mai picked up a piece of beef and glared at Xiao Hongyu. Stupid brat, what are you saying? Xiao Hongyu gave a silly grin and rubbed his head sheepishly. Just focus on your food. He Changdi warned. That brat had come to his tent to get a free meal personally cooked by his wife, but he was still boldly speaking nonsense and trying to get a rise out of him. That brat must be tired of living. TL note. There's apparently another type called hairy tofu, and there's a YouTuber who makes awesome high-quality videos who actually filmed the process, so here you go. Chapter 635. How Stinky. 3. Just as the tent was filled with sounds of merrymaking and chatter, a guard posted outside the tent came in to report. He Changdi set down his chopsticks and asked with a cold expression, "What's wrong?" The guard was one of He Changdi's men, so he replied very respectfully, "My lord, Great Steward Wei has arrived." By Great Steward Wei, the guard was referring to the emperor's trusted attendant, eunuch Wei Qinghai. Why had he chosen to visit during mealtime? Of course, everyone in the tent had heard He Changdi's conversation with the guard. They all set down their chopsticks as eunuch Wei was ushered in by the guard. Eunuch Wei entered the tent with two younger eunuchs behind him, one of them even carrying a container for food. Eunuch Wei first greeted everyone with a bow, before smiling as he made small talk. "Ah, what a coincidence. Even old Duke Zheng and your highness are here. I wonder what delicacy honored Lady Jianni has made this time?" Since he had mentioned Chu Lian in his question, the task of answering him naturally fell upon her shoulders. No, it wasn't any sort of delicacy, Eunuch Wei. I only told my maidservants to make a few simple dishes. The eunuch's smile became even warmer. You must be joking with me, honored lady. I could smell that fragrance from all the way over there. It was quite particular. Chu Lian almost choked on her saliva after hearing Eunuch Wei's words. She shot a nonchalant glance over at the entrance of the tent. Just as the eunuch had said, the emperor's luxurious tent could be seen not too far away. The easterly winds were blowing today as well, and they had been cooking upwind. No wonder they had been able to smell it from the emperor's tent. If not for Eunuch Wei still present at the scene, Chu Lian might have let out an expression of regret. He Changdi had been observing their interactions, and he found Eunuch Wei's attitude towards his wife rather strange. Before Chu Lian could reply once more, he stepped forward to block his wife from view. He cut in with, "May I ask what business Gonggong has here?" A tiny wrinkle developed on Wei Qinghai's brow. He wasn't very happy with the way He Changdi had interrupted his and Chu Lian's conversation. However, he was used to navigating treacherous social waters amongst the officials, so he wouldn't show this little bit of dissatisfaction on his face. His lips remained spread in a smile. Well, it's rare for such a chance to present itself. His Majesty would also like to try honored lattice cooking. Thus, I've come over shamelessly. Eunuch Wei sent a signal at the young eunuch behind him. The young eunuch quickly responded by offering up the food container in his hands. His Majesty said that we couldn't let honored lady offer up her food without a gift in return, so this is a reward for honored lady. They couldn't refuse a gift. What more something bestowed by the biggest boss in the Great Wu, the Emperor. Chu Lian received the box with both hands and made her gratitude known. When she turned around, she shot a reassuring look at her husband. Chu Lian worked swiftly. Since it was something to be served to the Emperor, she had to cook it herself. All Wenqing and Wanlan could do was to help with some minor tasks at the side. Furthermore, they had to be very careful with something made for the Emperor. Luckily, the dishes weren't very complicated, and she finished cooking in just 45 minutes. She handed over the food to Eunuch Wei directly, and he quickly left for the Emperor's tent. Once she was done cooking, the others in the tent had already had their fill. Since they still had some hunting to do in the afternoon, everyone quickly dispersed and returned to their own tents. When only Chu Lian and He Changdi were left in their tent, Chu Lian opened up the box that Eunuch Wei had sent over. Chu Lian gaped in surprise at the contents. The box was completely filled with bird's nest. They weren't the normal grade of bird's nest either. These were top-quality bloodbird's nests, in the most perfect crescent shapes. Products of this quality were usually used as tributes in the Great Wu, and there were very few of them in number. These were sent over from the Xinhua country every year, and only the most esteemed and respected women in the palace could enjoy these. Even in the modern world, this kind of bird's nest was considered extremely rare and precious. Why would the emperor gift her such valuable items for no reason? Chu Lian stared at the huge pile of blood birds' nests with her eyebrows drawn together. She looked up at He Changdi, who seemed to be brooding over the gift as well. "Hubby, what do you think His Majesty is thinking by sending such precious gifts?" He Changdi's profound gaze flickered over to Chu Lian. All the events of today had also left him rather confused. He caressed Chu Lian's cheek gently and shook his head. "I can't discern His Majesty's intentions for now. Let's just wait and watch." Since she couldn't understand what was going on either, Chu Lian simply set aside her thoughts and ordered Wenqing to put away the top-quality bird's nest. "Let's give some to Mother when we return." While Countess Jingan's illness had already been cured, she had struggled with it for so long that her body was sorely lacking in vigor. The nutritious bird's nest was exactly what she needed to boost her health right now. Warmth suffused He Changdi's heart. He pulled Chu Lian over into his lap. "No need. I just sent some medicinal ingredients over to Mother a few days ago." He Changdi placed light kisses down her cheek as he explained in a low tone. Chu Lian took his hand and started playing with his fingers. "But I don't have any use for this bird's nest. My boat is perfectly healthy. I don't need to eat things like that." Eating nutritious products like bird's nest when it wasn't needed could instead cause adverse effects to her body and affect her health. However, He Changdi didn't catch Chu Lian's meaning immediately, and his mind somehow turned on a crooked path instead. He bent down closer to her ear and let out a low chuckle. "What, are you worried that you'll be overly nourished again? Don't worry. With me around, we can work together to extinguish your fires anytime." Chu Lian was in awe of how He Changdi's mind could twist anything into something perverted. Chapter 636. How Stinky. 4. Wanlan looked at the stinky tofu before glancing back at Chu Lian. Finally, she shut her eyes, took up a pair of chopsticks, and shoved a piece of tofu into her mouth. Back in the emperor's luxurious tent, Eunuch Wei had returned from his journey and was now laying out dish after dish in front of the emperor. The emperor's eyes came alight, and he pointed at the food in front of him. Were these all made by Lianer? When there weren't any strangers around, the emperor had already started calling Chu Lian by a nickname instead, as if he could become closer to his daughter just by doing so. As the emperor's trusted confidant, Eunuch Wei knew exactly why the emperor was so delighted by a few dishes. He smiled and replied, "Yes, these were all made personally by honored Lady Janny. She even instructed this old servant about this dish. This new dish is called Stinky Tofu, and it has a rather peculiar smell. She said to simply take it away if your majesty doesn't like it." The emperor's nose twitched. The smell of the stinky tofu was indeed strange. Although it had already been fried and the smell wasn't as strong as it might have been, that peculiar odor was still much stronger than the rest of the fragrant dishes on the table. However, since it had been made sincerely by Chu Lian's own hands, the emperor wouldn't hesitate to eat it, even if it was a poison. "No need. We will have a taste of every dish." Since the emperor had already said so, Eunuch Wei naturally wouldn't try to stop him. Eunuch Wei called over the poison taster, who was also a eunuch. Once the taster had tried the dish, the emperor quickly picked up a piece of stinky tofu and put it into his mouth. Just like how it had conquered old Duke Zheng, the emperor's taste buds were completely taken over by the stinky tofu. Following that, he tried all the other dishes as well. Since Chu Lian had made them for the emperor alone, there wasn't much in each dish. There was exactly a single bowl's worth for each one. So even if he finished them all, he wouldn't be overly full. Just as the emperor was enjoying his meal in a great mood, Imperial Concubine Wei and Imperial Princess Liao arrived. Even before she had entered the tent, the emperor and Eunuch Wei could already hear Imperial Princess Liao's voice from inside. The 11-year-old Liao was still a child. Her voice held a hint of a child's clear tones, but it wasn't very likable. "What's that weird smell in Father's tent? Why is it so stinky? It smells terrible." What are you darn eunuchs doing? How could you let father stay in such a smelly tent? Do you still want to keep your heads? Princess Leio's voice had been clear at first, but later on, it turned nasally, indicating that she was pinching her nose closed. Eunuch Wei looked over at the Emperor in alarm. What he saw there made him hunker into his shoulders and take a step back in retreat. His master's face was looking extremely thunderous. This was clearly the calm before the storm. An instant later, Imperial concubine Weiss' voice traveled over as well. What are you standing there in a daze for? Didn't you hear what the princess said? Hurry up and bring over some flower dew. There was the sound of footsteps rushing away, clearly off to do Imperial concubine Weiss' bidding. It was only now that the tent flap was lifted up from outside as Imperial concubine Wei and Imperial Princess Liao entered the Imperial tent. Once they entered the tent, the smell of the stinky tofu was even stronger. Princess Liao was both sensitive to and disgusted by the smell of the stinky tofu. She was also used to being spoiled and pampered, which meant wearing incense-imbued clothes and carrying flower dew essence around with her. She had never before encountered such a strong odor before. Her line of sight fell upon the Emperor's dining table, and she noticed the disgusting, black thing sitting in a white porcelain dish. The moment she confirmed that the smell was coming from that dish, Imperial Princess Liao immediately gagged and ended up puking her guts out. Everything happened so suddenly that Imperial concubine Wei couldn't even stop her even if she tried. She could only watch as her daughter dirted the spotlessly clean Persian rug on the floor of the Imperial tent. The Emperor had just been eating his midday meal. Now, thanks to Imperial Princess Liao, he no longer had any appetite to eat even the rarest of delicacies. Eunuch Wei was stunned speechless. He admitted that the stinky tofu did live up to its name, but the smell wasn't so bad to that extent, surely? Princess Leio's action was quite exaggerated. How was His Majesty supposed to continue eating like this? He had just been praising the stinky tofu for being delicious. The Emperor slammed his jade chopsticks onto the table and roared out, "What's going on?" Imperial concubine Weiss' heart almost leaped out of her throat as she noticed the Emperor's gloomy expression. She hurriedly instructed her attendants to take care of Princess Liao as she tried to answer the Emperor. "Please calm down, Your Majesty. Yaoer didn't do it on purpose. She is sensitive to smells and she's just a child, so her stomach is weaker. She couldn't help her reaction when she breathed in the terrible smell in the tent. Take her away." Two eunuchs went up to either side of Princess Liao, prepared to send her out of the tent. Imperial concubine Wei had no choice but to comply. She carefully walked over to the Emperor's side and said, "Your Majesty, it was Yaoer's fault. Please forgive her as she's still just a child." She then cast a glance over the meal laid out on the Emperor's dining table. When she saw the black, stinky tofu, she let out a complaint. "Furthermore, this dish is just too smelly. What are the Imperial cooks doing? They should be punished." The Emperor had lost all of his earlier good mood, and he didn't want to listen to Imperial concubine Weiss' explanations. He waved her away impatiently. "You're dismissed. We're tired and we want to rest." Imperial concubine Wei hadn't thought that the Emperor would be this angry over the incident. Even if she didn't want to resign herself, she had no choice but to bob towards the Emperor and leave the Imperial tent. Once Imperial concubine Wei left, she investigated the incident and found out why the Emperor had been so unhappy. Chapter 637. Falling Off Her Horse, 1. So it was Chu Lian who had made that dish. She gritted her teeth and was instantly overcome with anger at Chu Lian. Concubine Wei lightly patted her daughter's back, then lovingly asked Princess Liao, "Are you feeling better?" Princess Liao had puked until her face had turned deathly pale. She only managed to stop puking with great difficulty, and she picked up a cup of tea from a palace maid. She took a sip from it and felt a little bit better. "Mother, does father hate me now?" Once she had calmed down, Princess Leio's eyes reddened. After a few more blinks, her tears began to fall. The Emperor had very few daughters and Princess Liao was the youngest of them all. Previously, she had been the most pampered princess, and the emperor had never spoke to her harshly. However, he had suddenly turned his temper on her, all because of a disgusting dish. How could the headstrong Princess Liao accept this? Imperial concubine Wei saw how red her daughter's eyes were, and quickly rubbed her head to console her. Yaoer, how could you think that? Your father has always loved you the most. He's just in a bad mood today, and you got caught up in it. Princess Liao sniffled, then buried her face in her mother's soft bosom. Imperial concubine Wei gently caressed her daughter's smooth hair, but her mind was incredibly tense as well. It was apparent that she had underestimated the place that the slut Yi Sun held in the emperor's heart. That girl was merely a lost cause that had crawled out of Yi Sun's belly, yet the emperor valued her so much. While imperial concubine Wei doted on her daughter, she couldn't spend all day with her as there was still the hunt in the afternoon. The emperor would lead his officials to the forest to hunt, so she needed to act as host for the female guests. A short while later, imperial concubine Wei hastily left, but she bumped into feudal Princess Anmin at the entrance of the tent. Anmin, take good care of Liao. That child is in a bad mood today. Imperial concubine Wei assigned this task to her before leaving. Feudal Princess Anmin respectfully complied. When imperial concubine Wei left, Anmin entered the tent to console imperial Princess Liao. In the tent, Princess Liao suddenly cried out in alarm, then her eyes widened with rage and disbelief. Cousin, what did you just say? Chu Lian cooked all the food at father's table just now? Feudal Princess Anmin, who was 2 years older than Liao, wore a grave expression as she nodded. That's right. With that information in mind, Princess Liao clenched her teeth. She wished she could put Chu Lian to death right now. Having been pampered by everyone in the palace, she was used to being arrogant and domineering. The 2 times where she had had to suffer the emperor's criticism had both been caused by Chu Lian. Adding on to that her hidden feelings for He Changdi, she truly hated Chu Lian now. Luckily, she didn't know of Chu Lian's true relationship with the emperor, or she would probably go mad otherwise. How can that Chu Lian be so vile? Princess Liao was angry and frustrated. Feudal Princess Anmin softly sneered and rolled her eyes. Cousin, why waste your time in hatred? Since you dislike her, just make life difficult for her. We're ladies of the imperial family. What's there to fear? Remember Chu Lian's identity. At best, she might be called Marchioness on Yuan, but at worst, she's just a child from a third-rate family. Hearing feudal Princess Amin's words, Princess Leo's eyes shone. Cousin, do you have an idea that can help me relieve my anger? In the afternoon, everyone gathered in the plaza after resting. The plaza was covered in flattened grass and surrounded by a fence of banners. It was clear that the stewards in charge of the hunting grounds had made proper preparations. There was an open-air stable, an exquisite viewing arena, an archery range, a beautifully maintained polo field, and various other facilities. The emperor walked at the very front and personally called out the names of people who were to enter the forest to hunt with him. Most of them were military officials. He Changdi, Royal Prince Lu Tai, Erzheng, and others were named. Even Sima Hui, the lady who had never been given a chance to prove herself as an equal match with men, was named. Prince Jin, who had been standing behind the emperor, suddenly glanced in Sima Hui's direction. He may have looked at her in a low-key manner, but his gaze carried a subtle warmth and smile. Sima Hui had been raised like a son. When she heard her name, she stepped out and saluted with a smile. Her actions were natural and open, and there wasn't any hint of shyness or embarrassment in her gestures, unlike most ladies. Her cool action immediately won the eyes and admiration of many young military officials. Though the emperor announced the names very quickly since it was already midday, they still had to hurry back before it got dark. Thus, everyone mounted their horses, and they galloped away into the forest. Right as the emperor left, Princess Liao disregarded the protests of her servants and guards and jumped onto a horse. She pulled on the reins and followed them into the forest. Feudal Princess Anmin hid in an inconspicuous spot, watching with disdain flashing across her eyes. Her lips suddenly widened into a smile. She turned towards an unfamiliar palace maid and said, "Did you see that? Tell Sixth Brother that it's been done." He Changdi, He Lin, Captain Gua, and several others had been personally ordered by the emperor to stay by his side. Currently, practically everyone had already hunted down an animal or two. He Sanlang in particular was doing very well. He showed mastery in archery and never missed. He had only shot 5 arrows, and every single one had hit a target. Due to this, the emperor seemed to look upon him with favor. In the forest, an agile doe was moving about. The emperor raised his bow and took aim. Right as he was about to shoot, he heard the voice of a guard beside him. "Your Highness, something happened." The moment of distraction was enough for the doe to escape into the distance. The emperor angrily asked in a deep voice, "What is it?" The guard trembled, but remained determined to make the report. "Your Highness, Princess Liao has followed us. She's right behind." "What? This is preposterous." The emperor's face instantly turned from tranquility to anger. Chapter 638. Chapter 639. Falling off her horse, 2. As Princess Liao had been heavily favored by the emperor during her childhood, the horse-loving emperor had often brought her to the ranch to relax. Therefore, Princess Liao wasn't the typical sheltered princess. She had learned to ride at a very young age, and having been trained by the emperor, she was in fact pretty skilled, and was in a different league from a newbie like Chulian. However, even if she possessed exceptional riding ability, that wasn't enough to gloss over the fact that her body was still that of a child. When she rode horses, she had always been given a very tame and gentle mare, but she had gotten on a horse meant for hunting, an unruly stallion. Due to her frame, she couldn't control such a spirited adult stallion no matter how skillful she was, so it only made sense that the emperor would worry. The emperor's brows were immediately pressed against each other. "Yuanzhou, take 2 men with you and find Liao. Send her back to be confined to Imperial concubine Weiss side." Yuanzhou was the name of the guard who reported this matter. After accepting the order, he was about to turn around, but he suddenly heard Princess Liao's young voice. "Ya." The emperor lifted one hand to stop the guard who was about to leave. He waited on the spot with everyone for Princess Liao's arrival, a thunderous expression on his face. Sure enough, Princess Liao appeared moments later. The way she rode the hunting stallion over made everyone sweat buckets from worry. Princess Liao had obviously noticed them as well. She smiled and waved at the emperor. "Father." The emperor now had a headache. Princess Liao was still some distance away, but the emperor couldn't help reprimanding her. "Preposterous. Who let you come? You're looking nothing like a lady." Princess Liao seemed to have predicted such words from the emperor, so she raised her chin at Sima Hu's direction. "Father, General Sima is a lady as well, yet she's allowed to be here. You're being sexist." The emperor hadn't expected Princess Liao to refute him like this, and it made his rage swell up even more. Right as Princess Liao's horse was about to reach the emperor's side, her horse suddenly reared up. It then started to flail around randomly like it had gone mad. The emperor's eyes widened. "Protect the princess." Amongst the people that were in the vicinity, the closest ones were He Changdi and Royal Prince Lu Tai. They couldn't see what had happened, but it was obvious that Princess Liao had lost control of her horse. Due to this abrupt development, Princess Liao herself started screaming in fright. She had only ever ridden gentle mares, so she had never encountered a situation where she completely lost control of her horse. In the end, she showed that she was still a child when her face paled and she subconsciously screamed. Even He Changdi, a reincarnated person, didn't have the time to decide whether to save her or not. At a crucial time like this, there was simply no time for them to weigh their gains and losses. He Changdi and Lu Tai both urged their horses towards Princess Liao. Everyone watched the dangerous scene nervously, and there was so much tension in the air that their hearts skipped a beat. The emperor's eyes remained wide, and he held his breath. Unfortunately, He Changdi, Lu Tai, and the other guards were still too slow. After all, they were too far away and distant waters couldn't put out a nearby fire. Before He Changdi and Lu Tai could get to her, Princess Liao had already been flung off the horse. The stallion was strong and spirited, while Princess Liao was merely an 11-year-old child. Getting flung off a horse like that, even if she survived, she would probably be crippled. A high-pitched neigh came from the stallion right before it fell to the ground, stirring up a small cloud of dust. The horse had been slaughtered by He Changdi with a single stroke. It had already gone mad. If he hadn't beheaded it, it might have ended up trampling on Princess Liao, who had fallen to the side. Everyone hastily rushed over. Lu Tai carefully held Princess Liao up. He didn't make any sudden moves, for fear that it might worsen any injury that she had sustained. The Emperor anxiously rushed to Lu Tai's side. Yaoer. Even if Princess Liao's character had become more displeasing to him, she was still the daughter the Emperor doted on the most. Right now, his daughter had gotten hurt before his eyes, so there was no way he could keep his cool. Hearing the Emperor's shout, Princess Liao seemed to have returned to her senses from her shock of getting thrown off the horse. She looked towards the Emperor's direction and began to cry loudly, "Father, Father, I'm scared. It hurts." The Emperor felt the pain of his heart being wrenched. The smart and wise ruler was at a loss for what to do when faced with the cries of his youngest daughter. He could only come up with an awkward attempt at consolation. "Don't be afraid, Yaoer. I'm here with you." After saying that, he roared at the top of his lungs for the imperial physicians. The imperial physicians were always brought along for the spring hunt, as minor injuries were commonplace during the hunts. However, the imperial physicians never followed them out on hunts in the forest, and they were currently still at the campsite. Chapter 639. Falling off her horse, 3. He Lin noticed the Emperor's grave expression and quickly walked up to him. "Your Majesty, the imperial physicians will take some time to arrive. However, this humble official has some knowledge of medicine. Please allow this humble official to examine the princess." The Emperor glanced at He Lin, which he took as permission. He Lin quickly went up to Princess Liao's side and took her pulse. Princess Liao stayed still, and He Lin quickly examined her as quickly as he could. A few moments later, He Lin turned around, with his brows tightly pressed together. "What's the result?" The Emperor was very familiar with He Lin, who was the commander of the Yulin army. Seeing the expression on his face, he was very much aware that the situation was dire. Right as He Lin was about to speak, the Emperor raised his hand to stop him, then took a few steps to the side, signaling to He Lin to speak softly. He Lin put his thoughts in order, and his expression became even more somber. "Your Majesty, please forgive me for being blunt, but I'm afraid Princess Liao's left leg might be crippled. Even if we find a highly skilled doctor who can save the leg, Princess Liao will have trouble walking in the future, even in the best case." The Emperor sucked a cold breath through his teeth. What? His daughter's leg was crippled? He Lin was an incredibly conservative and competent person, and he always spoke appropriately. He would never say something that he wasn't sure of. Since he said that Princess Liao's leg was truly crippled, the reality might even be worse than his statement. The Emperor shut his eyes and calmed down soon after. He walked back to Princess Liao's side. At this point of time, he had already regained his rationality. Right now, he wasn't just a father. In front of everyone, he was a monarch who wouldn't tolerate any failure. "Yuan Zhou, bring some men with you to take the princess back. At the camp, get Physician Zhou to treat Yaoer immediately." The guard, Yuan Zhou, immediately complied. Earlier, the Emperor and He Lin had intentionally stepped away to speak in privacy, but He Changdi had still been able to hear their conversation with his sharp ears. He was rather surprised at the condition of Princess Liao's leg. In his previous life, this hadn't happened at all. Even up till his death, all he knew was that Princess Liao was living happily and well. Yuan Zhou was about to pick up Princess Liao from Royal Prince Lu Tai's arms when Imperial Princess Liao unexpectedly cried out. With tears streaming down from her eyes and a heart-rending wail, she pointed at He Changdi and demanded, "Father, I want Big Brother Changdi to take me back, woo-woo." The Emperor was stunned. He stared over at He Changdi, who was still holding the long sword he had used to behead the horse in hand. The sword was still dripping blood, and he had an aura of slaughter about him. Finally, he got back onto his horse, and led his many officials deep into the mountains. Since he had watched his daughter get hurt, he had no mood to continue the spring hunt. However, he had already brought so many officials and nobles out, so it wouldn't be right to just return like this. He had to keep his spirits up and at least make a round around the hunting grounds today. Chapter 640. Falling off her horse. 4. Chu Lian and the other ladies were seated under a cool shelter, drinking tea and appreciating the scenery. At this moment, she was seated right beside Princess Wei and Royal Princess Duanjia. The one in the highest seat was Imperial Concubine Wei, which was to be expected. Then there were the various wives of the princes and imperial ladies. There seemed to be quite a number of people here, and the 3 viewing shelters were all completely filled. Royal Princess Duanjia tossed a walnut that Jinxiu had already opened into her mouth and rolled her eyes in the direction of feudal Princess Anmin. Princess Wei noticed her action and glared at her. Duanjia, don't be rude. Chu Lian was seated by Royal Princess Duanjia's side, so she turned to look towards feudal Princess Duanjia after hearing Princess Wei's comment. At this time, feudal Princess Duanjia and the other princesses were deeply engrossed in conversation. Royal princesses, feudal princesses, honored ladies, and other titled ladies who were related to the imperial family didn't possess any territory in the Great Wu dynasty. It wasn't like in the Tang dynasty where ladies could be granted territory. It was possible for small amounts of land to be granted, but the disparity in treatment between men and women was like that of heaven and earth. Even the closest female members to the emperor didn't hold much power. Feudal Princess Anmin's mother, Princess Andy, was one such person. Princess Andy was the 8th daughter of the previous emperor. Her mother had been of lowly birth and was a palace maid who had been taken by the previous emperor when he had gotten drunk once. After a difficult birth with Princess Andy, she had soon passed away. Rumors in the palace spread that Princess Andy was an unlucky star to her mother, so there was no concubine who was willing to foster her. She spent her younger years amongst the palace maids, and sometimes she hadn't even gotten to eat her fill. Later on, when the current emperor had taken the throne, Princess Andy was finally bestowed a title. However, due to the time that she had languished in the palace, the peak of Princess Andy's life had already passed before she got married. She only managed to give birth to a daughter, feudal Princess Anmin, when she was almost 30. Since Princess Andy didn't hold enough power, her prince consort had taken in 2 more concubines, and they had each given birth to an illegitimate son. Due to the existence of the illegitimate sons, feudal Princess Anmin didn't have a harmonious family. Chu Lian moved her gaze away and softly asked Royal Princess Duanjia, "What's wrong?" Royal Princess Duanjia snorted, "I just don't like her face." Chu Lu, remember to stay away from people like her. Chu Lian recalled the events stated in the book. Feudal Princess Anmin had merely been mentioned in a couple of lines, and there weren't any more details regarding her. Before Royal Princess Duanjia could explain to Chu Lian why she didn't like feudal Princess Anmin, they were disturbed by the loud noises coming from feudal Princess Anmin's table. The noises were then followed up with laughter from the young ladies. Everyone could hear a delicate and tender voice giggling. Imperial Concubine Wei, don't you think that it's really boring for us to just sit here? His Majesty and the others will only return from their hunt later at night. The one speaking is Royal Princess Nanzhong. Royal Princess Duanjia whispered into Chu Lian's ear. Royal Princess Nanzhong was Prince Luan's youngest daughter. Although she was of royal blood, her status was very average. Prince Luan was the 2nd son of the previous emperor's brother, Prince Zhao. In actuality, when it came to Royal Princess Nanzhang's generation, she was already considered a distant relative. However, Royal Princess Nanzhong was a talented speaker. She would often appear at upper-class gatherings, and she left a deep impression on many noble ladies in the capital. Even Imperial Concubine Wei liked her glib tongue. Royal Princess Nanzhong had earned her royal title from the power of her speaking alone, so from that angle, she was truly talented. Royal Princess Nanzhang's identity was similar to that of a mere socialite, and she wasn't even worth mentioning in the eyes of those who held real power. Imperial Concubine Wei, who sat on the upper seat, gave off an elegant smile. "You silly girl, It's only been a short while and you're already bored? Well then, do you have any bright ideas? Come and tell me about it. You are truly wise, Your Grace. You've managed to see through me so easily. Since you don't mind, they'll voice my bold suggestion. As she spoke, Royal Princess Nanjong swept her phoenix eyes around the shelter. She had a smile on her face, which made her seem amiable and approachable to others. Although we are of the fairer sex, it's not like we actually lack any strength. We may not be as strong as General Sima, but I believe that practically everyone here can ride a horse. How about we play a game of polo? In the Great Wu Dynasty, both football and polo were extremely popular. As horses were expensive, football became more popular to the masses than polo. Sometimes, young children could be seen playing football on the streets. Polo, on the other hand, was an activity solely for the rich and noble. Practically all noble ladies knew how to play it. Women's polo was a little more gentle than men's polo, and the sticks and balls that they used were different. They also played with fewer players than men, and they played using the most carefully selected tamares. Generally, there was no danger involved at all. This game was also an activity whereby ladies could showcase their physical talents. Chapter 641. Another Fall, 1. With that one sentence from Imperial Concubine Wei, many others immediately voiced out their agreement. She was the only concubine from the palace that the emperor had brought this time, so it was only natural that many ladies would want to curry favor with her. Even outside of the spring hunt, there would occasionally be a polo match or two held in the palace. Besides, the spring hunt was such a good opportunity to play. Since Imperial Concubine Wei had spoken, there would also naturally be people who volunteered to organize things. Feudal Princess Anmin stood up and looked in Royal Princess Duanjia's direction with a smile. I've long heard that Cousin Duanjia is skilled at polo, but I've never had the opportunity to see it for myself. Since a chance has presented itself, how about we each lead a team? Royal Princess Duanjia was indeed a great polo player. This was something that was well known in the circles of the imperial family, and there was no need to hide it. Before Princess Wei and Royal Princess Duanjia could reject the idea, Imperial Concubine Wei followed up. I've also heard about Duanjia's skill. Since a rare opportunity has presented itself, Duanjia should show these bumpkins what's what. Imperial Concubine Wei had spoken. It was very difficult to reject her at this point unless Royal Princess Duanjia had a real, physical excuse. Chu Lian had read through half of the original story, so she was aware that Imperial Concubine Wei and Feudal Princess Anmin weren't easy to deal with. This was especially so for Imperial Concubine Wei. Since she had spent many years in the palace, she definitely possessed some wit, along with the power to wield it. While all this seemed like nothing out of the ordinary, there might be a trap hidden somewhere. With these kinds of people who plotted many steps ahead, if one wasn't smart enough, the best choice would be to keep a low profile. But Imperial Concubine Wei seemed to have her sights locked on to Royal Princess Duanjia today. Just what was she intending to do? Logically speaking, Prince Wei was the Emperor's most favored brother, and Prince Wei never involved himself in politics at all. If Imperial Concubine Wei had some brains, she would behave amicably to be in the good graces of the Emperor. She wouldn't do something so stupid as to make things difficult for Royal Princess Duanjia, and she wouldn't dare to make Prince and Princess Wei her enemies. Chu Lian looked towards Royal Princess Duanjia and blinked. Her intentions were obvious. She was warning Duanjia to be careful. A slight smile surfaced on Royal Princess Duanjia's lips. She looked quite like Chu Lian when she smiled, and when put side by side, the two did indeed look like sisters. When Princess Wei caught sight of the two, she nearly became entranced by them. Royal Princess Duanjia stood up. Since Imperial Concubine Wei has already said so, Duanjia has to step up. This move had blocked Royal Princess Duanjia from selecting anybody of lower statuses, such as maids. She had to select ladies with proper backgrounds, or it would be disrespecting her opponents. Dignity trumped over everything. If Royal Princess Duanjia failed to assemble her team, there would be no need to even compete. Her side would have already lost, and would be ridiculed. Royal Princess Duanjia was competitive in nature, and she couldn't stand failure. Once her competitiveness took over, even Princess Wei wouldn't be able to control her. Chapter 642. Another fall. Royal Princess Duanjia looked around, and in the end, she dragged 3 young ladies into this. One of them was Royal Prince Han's wife, Royal Princess Su, who had come from a military family. She had already given birth to a daughter, and happened to be 19 this year, barely making it past the requirements. In comparison, the other side's team was completely made up of royalty that had yet to marry, and the oldest was merely 15. Next, Royal Princess Duanjia requested for Prince Luoyang's second daughter, feudal Princess Minghui, and Prince Qing's granddaughter, feudal Princess Shiro. With that, there were now 4 people on the team including Duanjia. However, there seemed to be no way for her to find her final team member. There were still several ladies of suitable ages standing near feudal Princess Amin's corner, but their statuses were too low, and they didn't even possess any titles. Right as Royal Princess Duanjia was starting to feel anxious, Royal Princess Nanzhong laughed out loud. "There's no difficulty in this at all. Isn't Honored Lady Jeannie a prime candidate? Duanjia, I see that you're pretty close to Jeannie, so why is it that you somehow forgot about her at this time? Could it be that the two of you have fallen out with each other?" Royal Princess Nanzhong truly had the gift of the gab. Now Chu Lian had no choice but to go. If she insisted on not participating, then there would probably be rumors of a falling out between her and Royal Princess Duanjia once the polo match ended. Royal Princess Duanjia was angered by Royal Princess Nanzhang's words. Her brows were tightly knit together, and she was about to argue with Nanzhong. Chu Lian quickly tugged on her sleeves and subtly shook her head at her. She then turned towards Royal Princess Nanzhong and feudal Princess Anmin with a smile and said, "Since that's the case, I'll join in to fill the empty seat. However, I've never played polo, so please be gentle with me. Our game is just for some entertainment. You'll be fine as long as you can ride a horse, Honored Lady Jeannie. The outcome doesn't matter at all." Feudal Princess Amin's smile was incredibly gentle. Royal Princess Duanjia hadn't thought that Chu Lian would really offer herself up and started getting a little antsy. "Chu Lu, you fool. Can't you tell that they were just trying to make you jump into a trap?" A furrow formed between Princess Wei's brows. She was a wise person, and could obviously tell that feudal Princess Anmin and the others were doing this on purpose. However, just what were they trying to achieve? "It'll be fine. They'll just be careful," Chu Lian softly consoled Royal Princess Duanjia. Royal Princess Duanjia pursed her lips, determination and vigor shining in her eyes. She understood that the reason Chu Lian had agreed despite knowing it was a trap was all for her sake. As they were close sisters, Chu Lian didn't want others to be making wild assumptions about their relationship, and she didn't want Duanjia's honor to be sullied. Since her childhood, Duanjia had never had a sister figure in her life. Whenever she attended banquets with her mother, she would witness girls from other families getting bullied, but there was always an older sister who would stand up for their little sisters. Right now, Royal Princess Duanjia felt that Chu Lian was like her older sister. This actually gave her a mysterious warmth inside. Of course, Chu Lian didn't notice this. She just did what she felt was right. She didn't want to act as a coward just to survive. She didn't know that her nonchalant gesture had touched Royal Princess Duanjia and Princess Wei's hearts. Just like that, the lineup of both teams was already set. The two teams entered their respective tents to prepare. They had to remove all of the hairpins in their hair along with the other accessories they were wearing, and they also had to choose a polo mallet and a horse suitable for them. During the preparations, Royal Princess Duanjia made use of every second to explain the rules of polo to Chu Lian. Chu Lian kept nodding as she listened. She had a great memory, and it wasn't like she knew nothing at all about polo. After all, polo was still played in modern times. The rules here were simply a little different. She was now good enough at riding, but she wasn't expecting much from herself. She just had to make sure not to burden the team and keep herself safe, and everything else would be left to Royal Princess Duanjia. Both feudal Princess Minghui and Royal Princess Su were adept at playing polo, while Royal Princess Duanjia was an amazing player. They had a good shot at winning. Although there was quite a lot of time for them to prepare, it still passed very quickly for Chulian, who was still trying her best to commit the details of the game to memory. Royal Princess Duanjia personally chose a horse and polo mallet for Chulian. Very soon, the two teams entered the polo field, while Imperial Concubine Wei led the other ladies to a viewing platform. All the members of Royal Princess Duanjia's team had a scarlet-red cloth on their arms, while Feudal Princess Amin's side had tied a blue cloth on theirs. The hunting grounds had its own referee. With a loud blow of the whistle, the competition officially began. The polo ball was thrown up into the air. Royal Princess Duanjia twitched her reins, and her valiant white horse shot forward. When it arrived at the polo ball, it raised its hooves up high with a neigh. Royal Princess Duanjia lifted her hands up and stepped hard on the stirrups. This put her in a standing position with her, but floating above the saddle. Her arm was at a slight angle, and with a slight swing, she snatched the polo ball. With this swing, the polo ball flew in Royal Princess's direction. The ball was already gone by the time Feudal Princess Anmin arrived. Since she had missed the chance to possess the ball, she was now at a disadvantage. Feudal Princess Anmin angrily bit her bottom lip and glared at Royal Princess Duanjia. Royal Princess Duanjia sat back down on the saddle with her chin slightly raised, wearing a subtle smile as she glanced at Feudal Princess Anmin with disdain. Chu Lian guarded the left side of the field, watching as Royal Princess Duanjia lead Feudal Princess Shiro in a charge towards the opponent's side of the field. The ladies raised their tender voices, constantly shouting out to each other, and the competition was abnormally fierce. Chapter 643. Another Fall, 3. It was at this time that Feudal Princess Minghui suddenly charged out from the left. Her body bent backwards at what seemed like an impossible angle. She swung her polo mallet, and she stole the ball in a shocking move. The ball was sent flying in an arc, and in 2 seconds, the ball entered the opponent's net with a pop. Royal Princess Duanjia's red team had scored a point. Loud cheers immediately burst out from the ladies on the viewing platform. Even Princess Wei had a wide smile on her face. Following closely after that, the red team scored another point, making honored Lady Xinqing look at Royal Princess Duanjia in a different light. The super amateur Chu Lian felt that she was actually going to be carried to victory. At this moment, at an angle hidden to the others, Feudal Princess Anmin signaled at Prince Hex's twin daughters Donger and Nanaer with her eyes. Nanaer nodded. This time, it was the blue team's turn to serve the ball. Royal Princess Nanzhang landed a heavy hit on the polo ball, sending it flying up in the air and towards the red team's side of the field. The midfielders, Nanaer and Donger, whipped their horses forward and wildly charged into the red team's territory. In the middle of their charge, Nanaer and Donger glanced at each other. The heads of their horses turned, and they started galloping towards Chu Lian instead. Donger swung her mallet, which caused the polo ball to roll in Chu Lian's direction. Nanaer twitched the reins of her horse, causing it to speed up. At this point, Royal Princess Duanjia and the others were still on the other side of the field, and they didn't have any way of getting there before Nanaer and Donger. When Chu Lian noticed that Nanaer and Donger were charging towards her, her brows furrowed, as she instinctively felt a sense of danger approaching. If they wanted to hit her horse, then she just had to dodge. However, it was right at this moment that the small polo ball coincidentally hit the butt of Chu Lian's steed. The horse was startled badly, causing it to whinny and rear up. It started to run off without paying any heed to Chu Lian's commands. Now that her opportunity to escape had been taken away, Nanaer and Donger rushed to Chu Lian's side. In a seemingly accidental manner, they slammed into Chu Lian on both sides. They used their mallets to control the polo ball, while Chu Lian was sandwiched between them and unable to move. When Donger and Nanaer were fighting to snatch the polo ball on the ground, their mallets inadvertently hit Chu Lian's horse. After they galloped away, Chu Lian's horse suddenly flew into a rage, with every intention to fling its rider off. Chu Lian was still an amateur at horse riding, and she hadn't learned enough riding techniques yet. She didn't know how to calm the horse down and control it. Princess Wei and the distant Royal Princess Duanjia felt their hearts stop. Princess Wei immediately ordered one of her servants who knew martial arts to rescue Chu Lian. However, it was still too late. They were too far away, and they were about to witness Chu Lian being flung off a crazed horse. In the end, Chu Lian was thrown off when she lost hold of the reins. She cried out in alarm, but right at this moment, a majestic horse suddenly charged onto the field. The horse leapt over the wooden fence surrounding the field easily, and the rider of the horse actually jumped off the horse's back without any regard for his own safety. A tall and slender figure caught Chu Lian in midair, then embraced her tightly. Moments later, there was the muffled sound of bodies hitting the ground. The world seemed to go out of focus for Chu Lian as she rolled uncontrollably for a few rounds before coming to a stop. An unfamiliar, chilly fragrance surrounded her, and the embrace she felt wasn't one that was familiar to her. Once she recovered from the shock, Chu Lian calmed her emotions and slowly opened her eyes. What entered her eyes first was a black robe, then fair skin, a prominent Adam's apple, and a clean and smooth-looking chin with slight traces of stubble. The shape of the chin was very delicate-looking, and not at all what she was familiar with. Chu Lian was immediately frozen from this. There was fear, shock, anxiety, and other negative emotions in her heart. This man who had suddenly appeared wasn't her husband, He Changdi. Who was it? In the next second, Chu Lian felt the hold on her waist tighten and a stranger's hand impudently caressing her waist. She then heard a familiar voice from above her head. "My dear Lianer, are you all right?" That was Xiao Bojian's voice. Chu Lian sucked in her breath through her teeth. The shock of learning this made her push away the man embracing her with everything she had. However, the difference between a man and a woman's physical strength wasn't so easy to overcome. Xiao Bojian's arms were like steel clamps locking her in place. She couldn't move at all. When Chu Lian had been flung off her horse, the audience on the viewing platform was in an uproar. Many of them hadn't expected such an accident to happen in a simple game of women's polo. Even Imperial Concubine Wei showed some semblance of shock. Right now, it was already too late for anyone to save honored Lady Jeannie. It didn't matter how good their reflexes were. Just as everyone had determined that honored Lady Jeannie was destined to be a cripple, someone from outside the field charged in, and even leapt off his horse to save honored Lady Jeannie without any regard for his own safety. Someone on the viewing platform said with astonishment, Isn't that Scholar Xiao? With that reminder, everyone immediately recognized the person who had saved Chu Lian. That person was indeed Xiao Bojian. Xiao Bojian had been born with amazing features that were unforgettable to anyone he met. Chapter 644. Another Fall. 4. Sir Xiao was a man overflowing with talent whose political prowess stood out even in court, gaining the admiration of many. Although he was of humble origins, his features were beautiful and he had a great reputation. He was now in his early 20s and hadn't yet married. For the sake of respecting his future wife, he didn't even have a single concubine or maid in his home. He was still a bachelor, but he was already considered a great candidate for a son-in-law in the eyes of the noble madams in the capital. If the one who had been saved today was some unmarried royal princess or feudal princess, this could have turned into a fairy tale. All that would be needed was for Imperial Concubine Wei to betroth her to Xiao Bojian, and it would be absolutely perfect. Unfortunately, the one who was saved was honored Lady Jeannie, the wife of Marquis An Yuan, a lady who was already married. Now the situation was turning awkward. Looking at them, Sir Xiao seemed to be hugging honored Lady Jeannie pretty tightly. The look in his eyes was filled with emotion too. It couldn't be that these two had feelings for each other before, right? Otherwise, why would Xiao Bojian have chosen to risk a serious injury for the sake of saving honored Lady Jeannie at a critical situation like this? Suddenly, everyone's thought processes turned 180 degrees, with all sorts of guesses and gossip flooding their minds. Princess Wei was the first to return to her senses. She angrily watched how tightly Xiao Bojian held Chu Lian, but before she could speak, there was suddenly a loud commotion coming from the rear of the polo field. Everyone's eyes were drawn towards the direction of the commotion, and it was an incredible sight to behold. The emperor had returned. He was standing some distance away with his brows furrowed and his hands behind his back with a dignified expression on his face. He was an incredibly charismatic ruler, and nobody could guess at what was on his mind. He stood in front of the others, all standing in that corner in a strange silence. Those on the viewing platform didn't know how long he had been standing there and how much he had seen. Hichangdi was also there at one side. He had also seen what happened alongside the emperor, but they had happened to arrive right as Xiao Bojian was rolling on the ground with Chu Lian in his arms. His phoenix eyes narrowed with a deep glare in Xiao Bojian and Chu Lian's direction. The air was heavy around him, and his dashing face couldn't get any darker. He even subconsciously held Royal Princess Liao more forcefully. Princess Liao groaned. Then with a teary voice she said, "Brother Changdi, please be more gentle. You're hurting me?" It was this voice that seemed to break the mysterious silence. Princess Leo's leg had already been treated. It was now firmly secured by wooden planks. Princess Weiss' subordinate had finally reached Chu Lian's side. When the maid who had been tasked with saving Chu Lian saw how tightly Xiao Bojian was holding Chu Lian, her eyes narrowed. Acting as if she hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary, she said, "Honored lady, are you hurt anywhere? Please allow this servant to help you up." Xiao Bojian finally released Chu Lian, and Chu Lian was supported to a standing position by the maid. Other than her pale face from the fright and several tears on her clothes, she hadn't gotten any serious injuries and was pretty much fine. The maid sighed in relief before finally helping Xiao Bojian up. However, the severity of Xiao Bojian's injuries outclassed Chu Lian's by far. When they had been rolling on the ground, he had held Chu Lian so tightly and acted as her shield without care for himself. His right leg was sprained, and there were heavy bruises on multiple parts of his body. There were likely internal injuries hiding under those bruises as well. He would need some time to recuperate from this. As the maid helped Xiao Bojian up, he stumbled due to his sprained ankle. Who knew if he had done it on purpose or not? He somehow fell in Chu Lian's direction. Although Chu Lian didn't like Xiao Bojian as a person and even felt disgust towards him, it was still a fact that he had saved her when she had been flung off her horse. Since he was going to fall, she couldn't push him away. Thus, she caught him. However, Xiao Bojian rested his entire body on Chu Lian's shoulder, and his arms directly wrapped around Chu Lian's waist. Chu Lian stiffened up. She was about to push him away in anger, but Xiao Bojian had already let go before that could happen. Chu Lian didn't speak a word of this, as his action had seemed unintentional. Chu Lian suspiciously sized Xiao Bojian up and asked with an unfriendly tone, "Are you badly hurt? Thank you for saving me back there." Right as she was about to turn away from Xiao Bojian, she noticed the group of people who were in front of her and to the left. The most conspicuous person, standing at the front, was obviously the emperor, with Hichangdi right beside him. Chu Lian's pupils shrunk. She subconsciously opened her mouth with the intention of explaining everything to him. However, when she looked at him properly, she noticed that there was someone in his arms. From the size of that person, along with the clothes and hairstyle, it was obviously a lady. It was at this moment that the woman in Hichangdi's arms turned her head. At an angle that Hichangdi couldn't see, she gave Chu Lian a wicked smile. Chu Lian sucked in a deep breath. It was Imperial Princess Liao. Any woman would know what Imperial Princess Leo's gaze embodied. It was a form of provocation, a declaration of war. Chu Lian couldn't help taking 2 steps back. Her figure seemed like a swaying willow on the verge of collapse. Her line of sight shifted to Hichangdi, whose deep and chilly eyes stared right back at her. He had a grim expression, like he was an insurmountable statue of ice. Chu Lian opened her mouth, wanting to explain, but it was then that Hichangdi turned away, shifting his gaze elsewhere. Suddenly, Chu Lian felt as if someone had stabbed her in the heart. Her hands hidden under her sleeves formed into tight fists, her nails digging into her palm, forming deep marks, but she couldn't feel it at all. Chu Lian's mind fell into chaos. She had no idea when he had come, and didn't know how much he had seen. If he had arrived earlier, why hadn't he come to save her? Was he misunderstanding the relationship between Xiao Bojian and her? After receiving leniency, Chu Lian bowed her head towards the emperor, offering a greeting as much as she was able to. The emperor looked at Chu Lian in a seemingly nonchalant manner, but he noticed that Chu Lian was in a trance and appeared dispirited. He looked towards Xiao Bojian and Imperial Concubine Wei again, then slightly narrowed his eyes. Xiao Bojian, you have accomplished a commendable deed for rescuing someone this time. Well, keep this in mind for the time being and grant you a reward when we return to the palace. If there's nothing wrong after the Imperial Physician's examination, then the both of you can go back to your tents for an early rest. Both Chu Lian and Xiao Bojian replied in agreement. However, the expressions of the people beside them had all subtly changed. What was going on? Why was the emperor suddenly favoring Xiao Bojian right now? What great merit had he achieved? He had merely saved honored Lady Jeannie, who also happened to be Marchioness Anya. Moreover, he did it voluntarily. Why was he being rewarded for a commendable deed? Although honored Lady Jeannie had been conferred a title, she wasn't really a descendant of the imperial family. The emperor didn't need to grant a reward since this matter had nothing to do with him. Everyone was confused about this situation. However, they looked at Xiao Bojian and Chu Lian with even more complicated emotions in their eyes. Imperial Concubine Wei promptly dismissed the audience of ladies. The imperial physician came to take Chu Lian and Xiao Bojian's pulses respectively. As Chu Lian had insisted, she hadn't sustained any major injuries. She only had some minor scratches and bruises, and she had also suffered some fright. However, Xiao Bojian was heavily injured. He had not only sprained his ankle, but also sustained some internal injuries. It would probably take at least 2 to 3 months for him to recover. Wenqing and Wanlan helped Chu Lian to walk forward. She turned towards Xiao Bojian and bobbed in gratitude. Xiao Bojian noticed the cold and desolate look within her eyes. A corner of his lips tugged downwards and he whispered, "When did you become so distant from me, Lianer? Didn't I just risk my life to save you? That was what I promised you earlier." Chu Lian frowned and gave him a complicated look. She didn't say anything else, then turned around and left. Xiao Bojian stared after Chu Lian's slender, delicate back until his line of vision was blocked by some tints. His formerly gentle and handsome face instantly turned gloomy and vicious. He clenched his fists and kicked the cushioned stool that Chu Lian had been sitting on earlier. Xiao Bojian couldn't control the rage within his heart. It was as if his entire body had been set alight with fire. Preposterous. She didn't believe me. The imperial physician was shocked by his abrupt actions and lost the ability to respond for a moment. Princess Weiss' subordinate had finally reached Chu Lian's side. When the maid who had been tasked with saving Chu Lian saw how tightly Xiao Bojian was holding Chu Lian, her eyes narrowed. Acting as if she hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary, she said, "Honored lady, are you hurt anywhere? Please allow this servant to help you up." Xiao Bojian finally released Chu Lian, and Chu Lian was supported to a standing position by the maid. Other than her pale face from the fright and several tears on her clothes, she hadn't gotten any serious injuries and was pretty much fine. The maid sighed in relief before finally helping Xiao Bojian up. However, the severity of Xiao Bojian's injuries outclassed Chu Lian's by far. When they had been rolling on the ground, he had held Chu Lian so tightly and acted as her shield without care for himself. His right leg was sprained, and there were heavy bruises on multiple parts of his body. There were likely internal injuries hiding under those bruises as well. He would need some time to recuperate from this. As the maid helped Xiao Bojian up, he stumbled due to his sprained ankle. Who knew if he had done it on purpose or not? He somehow fell in Chu Lian's direction. Although Chu Lian didn't like Xiao Bojian as a person and even felt disgust towards him, it was still a fact that he had saved her when she had been flung off her horse. Since he was going to fall, she couldn't push him away. Thus, she caught him. However, Xiao Bojian rested his entire body on Chu Lian's shoulder, and his arms directly wrapped around Chu Lian's waist. Chu Lian stiffened up. She was about to push him away in anger, but Xiao Bojian had already let go before that could happen. Chu Lian didn't speak a word of this, as his action had seemed unintentional. Chu Lian suspiciously sized Xiao Bojian up and asked with an unfriendly tone, "Are you badly hurt? Thank you for saving me back there." Right as she was about to turn away from Xiao Bojian, she noticed the group of people who were in front of her and to the left. The most conspicuous person, standing at the front, was obviously the Emperor, with He Changdi right beside him. Chu Lian's pupils shrunk. She subconsciously opened her mouth with the intention of explaining everything to him. However, when she looked at him properly, she noticed that there was someone in his arms. From the size of that person, along with the clothes and hairstyle, it was obviously a lady. It was at this moment that the woman in He Changdi's arms turned her head. At an angle that He Changdi couldn't see, she gave Chu Lian a wicked smile. Chu Lian sucked in a deep breath. It was Imperial Princess Liao. Any woman would know what Imperial Princess Liao's gaze embodied. It was a form of provocation, a declaration of war. Chu Lian couldn't help taking 2 steps back. Her figure seemed like a swaying willow on the verge of collapse. Her line of sight shifted to He Changdi, whose deep and chilly eyes stared right back at her. Chapter 647. She must be crazy to have fallen for him. 3. After she exited the tent, Wenqing called over one of the Anyuan estate's guards and told him to search for He Changdi. The guard didn't dare procrastinate and swiftly left. Chu Lian drank the medicine that the female physician had prescribed. The medicine contained medical herbs with a sedative effect, so Chu Lian promptly fell asleep. She didn't know how long she slept, but the lanterns within the tent were already lit when she woke up. Wenlan probably heard the movement behind the screen, so she hastily came in. She walked over to the side of the bed and helped Chu Lian sit up, placing a soft pillow behind her to cushion her back. "Third young madam, are you hungry? Do you want to eat something?" Chu Lian looked around the tent. "What time is it?" Wenlan handed a cup of warm water to her. "Just past 11. Chu Lian took a sip of warm water. She was slightly surprised since she didn't expect to fall asleep until it was almost midnight. Wenlan didn't hear her reply regarding whether she wanted to eat something, so she decided to just go out and tell Wenqing to bring the food box in. "Third young madam, we've prepared some shredded chicken and mushroom porridge. We also have the side dishes that we brought over from the estate. Third young madam should eat some." Chu Lian nodded. Although she didn't really have an appetite, she was indeed hungry. Wenqing and Wenlan were delighted by her willingness to eat. They found a small side table to serve as a tray to put on the bed, then took the porridge and side dishes out of the food box. Chu Lian ate half a bowl with much difficulty. After there was some food lining her stomach, she didn't feel like eating anymore. She waved her hand towards Wenlan. "Take them away. I'm already full. There's still plenty of porridge left. You can eat some if you're hungry." Wenqing looked at the bowl of porridge, which was still half full, and was thinking of persuading Chu Lian to eat a little more. However, before she could say anything, her young madam had already retreated back into the blanket, prepared to lie down again. Wenlan looked towards her older sister and shook her head. All they could do was clean up everything as ordered. They went out after confirming that Chu Lian had really fallen asleep again. The sister's eyes were filled with worry. "Sister, third young madam must be truly angry this time." She didn't even ask about third young master's whereabouts. Normally, if He Changdi wasn't at home and she had finished eating, Chu Lian would instruct them to save some food for third young master, or ask when He Changdi would return. However, Chu Lian hadn't said a word about He Changdi's situation just now. She also hadn't asked when he would be coming back. Moreover, she didn't even talk about whether He Changdi had eaten yet, as if He Changdi didn't exist anymore. Didn't you send someone to ask in the afternoon?" Thus, he could hear the sound of Chu Lian's gentle breathing from behind the screen. He stood there, listened for a while, and confirmed that Chu Lian was asleep. Next, he took off his damp cloak and casually placed it on the back of the chair beside him. Following that, he quietly walked around the screen and arrived beside the bed. If someone had slept beside her, she would have definitely sensed it. Moreover, when she woke up this morning, the bedding beside her was still very neat. Nothing had been moved, so it didn't seem like someone had slept there. Wanlan was attentive and noticed the look in Chu Lian's eyes. She summoned up her courage to explain. When this servant brought hot water over this morning, I saw third young master sleeping on the chaise behind the screen. Chu Lian narrowed her eyes. The light in her normally clear, bright eyes instantly dimmed. When Wanlan saw that, her heart felt like it was being crushed and it ached painfully. She regretted telling third young madam about that matter. Chu Lian didn't ask any more questions after that. She rested against the bed frame for a while with dull eyes. An hour later, she asked Wenqing to help her up for breakfast. The breakfast was on the table in the middle of the tent, so Wenqing helped Chu Lian walk over to the table. In the middle of the meal, Wenqing softly said, "Third young madam, this servant has something to report." Chu Lian regained her focus and cheered up. She lifted her head and looked at Wenqing. "Tell me." "Third young madam, Imperial Princess Leo's leg was injured after she insisted on going hunting in the woods yesterday. The Imperial physician said that even after she recuperates, her leg would probably be crippled." Chu Lian was slightly shocked after listening to Wenqing's words. Imperial Princess Leo's leg was likely going to be crippled? She looked at Wenqing again and saw that she had lowered her head and stopped talking. Chu Lian sighed helplessly as she understood the meaning behind Wenqing's words. She was probably helping He Changdi explain. An explanation for him returning late at night and the reason he wasn't concerned about her injury. However, it simply didn't make sense. Imperial Princess Liao had only injured her leg. Even if she had injured her head, it still didn't have anything to do with He Changdi. Why would he return late at night because of Imperial Princess Liao? It couldn't possibly be from the Emperor's imperial order, could it? That is, unless the Emperor had nothing better to do and wanted to make things difficult for him. He, a married young man who already had a legitimate wife. It was true that Imperial Princess Liao had feelings for him, but she was still young. Neither Imperial concubine Wei nor the Emperor would be so desperate to choose a married man, who was nearly 10 years older than Imperial Princess Liao, for her. After Chu Lian finished eating, she set down her chopsticks and stood up. "All right, I understand. Wenqing, Wanlan, come with me for a walk." Wenqing didn't think that third young madam would react so calmly. She felt somewhat uneasy inside and didn't dare to speak up again. Chu Lian pulled aside the thick curtains of the tent that kept out the wind. Then, she looked towards the wide horizon of the clear blue sky. "You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.